Chapter 169 Back to the Future 3 months later, Sunny was back at the castle. Well, to be precise, he had returned here once before to buy a few items that were hard to come by in the ruins. However, back then, Nephis and her cohort had been away on a hunt. No such luck today. The moment he had been dreading for so long was finally here. Hearing Changing Star's voice, Sunny slowly turned around, glanced at her, and forced out a smile. "Hey, Neph, long time no see." He tried to sound casual, but a slight tremble betrayed the storm of emotions raging in his heart. Why did she have to be here? The turmoil of their sudden meeting was exasperated by the fact of how different they looked. The past months only made Nephis appear more radiant and splendid. Her white armor was pristine and graceful, her silver hair clean and combed. Sunny, on the other hand, looked like a pile of dirt that had somehow come to life. Both he and the puppeteer's shroud had seen better days. He didn't want to see her, but even more than that, he didn't want her to see him in this sorry state. What if Neph gets the ridiculous idea that he was somehow miserable after falling out with her? Nonsense! He was doing better than ever. He lived in a palace, ate delicious food every day, and had even become incredibly wealthy. If anyone should be miserable, it would be her. "You do realize that you said that out loud, do you?" Sunny blinked, remembered where he was, and stared at Changing Star in shock. "Huh? What?" She smiled with the corner of her mouth. "You just zoned out and mumbled, 'Why did she have to be here?' under your breath. That was not very polite." Sunny hid his embarrassment behind a grin and said, "Yeah, well, I meant it." Neph sighed. "I'm glad to see you too, Sunny. It's good to see you're alive." Trying to conceal his discomfort, he shrugged. "What? You didn't expect me to survive without you?" She looked at him for a while and slightly shook her head. "No, on the contrary, I knew that you would be fine." Then she paused for a moment and added in a flat tone, "After all, a cockroach like you is not easy to kill." Sunny scoffed. "Now who's being impolite?" Nephis stared at him in confusion for a couple of moments, then chuckled. "Oh, sorry. I meant it as a compliment." He was glad to see Neph too. As much as Sunny wanted to deny it, he had desperately missed her calm presence. Somewhere along the way, without even noticing, he had grown reliant on having her by his side. But meeting her was also a nightmare. After all, nothing had really changed after their bitter quarrel. Even though the intensity of it all diminished, the future that Cassie had foretold was still inevitable. Now that the initial shock of running into Changing Star had disappeared, Sunny took a closer look at her. Nephis looked stronger. He didn't know how much soul essence she had been able to absorb while he was gone, but it seemed like it was a lot. Neph was always confident and arresting, but now her presence grew to a completely new level. But then again, he was not the same weak fool either. The Dark City had made him into a fearsome creature as well. The months he had spent hunting monsters in the absolute darkness of the cursed ruins turned him smarter, stronger, and much more deadly. If a little bit insane. Sunny doubted that any human on the Forgotten Shore had killed as many powerful nightmare creatures as he had in the same amount of time. At least not in single combat. "Don't go on a tangent and forget where you are again." With a flinch, Sunny realized that he had been silent for a long time. An awkward silence hung between them, threatening to make him look bad. I need to say something, like, "How have you been?" No, that's a stupid question. "How about—" However, before he could speak, Nephis asked, "So, what brings you to the Bright Castle? Are you back?" Startled, he scratched the back of his head and scrambled to find an answer. "Oh, just doing some shopping." She blinked. "Shopping? Wait, did that sound weird?" Sunny's eyes widened. "Wait, did I say that out loud again?" He slapped his mouth shut and looked at Changing Star in horror. "God damn it, who knew that a habit of talking to myself would be so detrimental to keeping my dignity intact?" On the ground next to him, his shadow was having a swell time basking in his anguish. It was shaking its head and dying laughing. Several seconds later, Sunny was finally able to speak again. Yeah, shopping. I have some soul shards to spare, so I wanted to buy a memory or a few." Nephis looked at him for a while, then said, I see. Then she turned away and asked, her voice calm and even as always, Do you want to go somewhere and talk? Sunny's heart skipped a beat. He gritted his teeth. Sorry, no can do. I'm, waiting for someone. Changing Star lingered for a few moments, then asked, You're hiding in that alley because you're waiting for someone? Who are you waiting for, Sunny? He waved a hand. Oh, you know, a friend. Well, more like an associate, really. An acquaintance? Neff remained silent for a few moments, then said in an even tone, You can just say no. No need to invent some... But right at that moment, an enchanting voice came from the entrance of the alley. Sunny! Hey! Are you here? Turning around, Sunny saw a beautiful young man with gorgeous auburn hair and mesmerizing green eyes enter the alley. He was wearing an armor made out of burnished brown leather and blue silk clothes beneath, all of which fit him perfectly. On his face there was a bright smile. It was Kai. Knight. Whatever his name was. Sunny exhaled with relief. What do you mean, invent? See, he's right. However, the words died on his lips, because when he turned to Changing Star, he saw something that he had never seen before. Looking at the young man whom he had set free from the bottomless dark well, Nephis took a step back. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide and glassy. She seemed to be consumed by absolute, utter horror. Chapter 170. Star-Crossed. Sunny had never seen Nephis show fear before, not to mention being truly horrified. Instantly, every muscle in his body tensed, and a cold shiver ran through it. It can't be! It can't be! She was a person who faced demons and fearsome abominations without even flinching. What could scare her so much? Was he mistaken? Was Kai an incarnation of some primordial evil after all? How could this be? Panicking, he turned back to face the charming young man and outstretched one arm, ready to summon the Midnight Shard. Not that it would help, even if Changing Star was scared. But, to his surprise, Kai wasn't showing any signs of being an ancient terror. In fact, he was looking at him with a cute expression of confusion. Sunny? Who is your friend? No, it didn't make any sense. Not only was Sunny sure of his judgment, he had also seen multiple people greeting Knight as though they knew and liked him. He couldn't be a nightmare creature. Then, what was wrong with Nephis? Keeping his shadow's gaze on the charming archer, Sunny slowly turned back and glanced at Changing Star. She was still standing there, seemingly paralyzed by fear. What was going on? Neph? She flinched and tore her eyes away from Kai. After a few seconds, Changing Star cautiously leaned forward and whispered, Sunny, what is Knight doing here? He frowned. He's the friend I was telling you about. She lingered, then shook her head. No, I mean, what is he doing here? The emphasis was on the word here. Where else would he be? Completely lost, Sunny struggled to understand what was going on. Maybe she knew something about the kidnapping? That didn't make any sense. Finally, he said, I saved his life in the ruins, so he's doing me a favor in return. Nephis stared at him with desperation, then shook her head again. No, I mean, what is Knight doing here on the Forgotten Shore? Sunny scowled. Did you guys know each other in the real world? Nephis looked at him with a funny expression. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Finally, she forced herself to speak. You don't know who he is? Meanwhile, Kai, who was politely staying silent through this whole weird conversation, smiled dazzlingly and said, He really doesn't. Isn't it wonderful? Sunny gave him a dark look. How would I know who he is? Make sense, please. Neff was silent for a while, then loudly whispered, That's Knight, you idiot! Knight from Nightingale? The Knight? What was she going on about? He had no idea what that meant. Sunny rubbed his face with irritation. What are you talking about? What is a nightingale? Nephis looked at Kai, paled even more, and finally said in a small voice, It's only the best and most famous idol group of the last decade. triple Orpheus winners, 100 consecutive weeks at the top of all charts, 6 diamond albums. That Nightingale. That Night, the lead vocalist. Sunny simply stared. Wait, are you telling me? Was she so out of it because Kai used to be a member of some stupid boy band in the past? Changing Star was not horrified, she was starstruck? He remained silent for a while, and then exploded into laughter. Gods! Oh, gods! Nephis is a fangirl! What the spell? That's too funny. Come to think of it, when they first met, she had been wearing headphones the whole time. You should have realized that Neph was into music much earlier. Mighty and stoic Changing Star, brought down by a dainty idle boy. That was just too hilarious. He wasn't even jealous. What were the chances of meeting her bias in the damn dark city? You couldn't come up with that crap. As he was dying from laughter, both Changing Star and Kai glared at him with difficult expressions. However, Sunny just couldn't stop. His laughter only died down after he began wheezing. Sorry, I just didn't expect it from you. Oh, gods. As for your question, Knight has been here for about 2.5 years. He lives in the castle. Nephis seemed thoughtful for a few moments, then glanced at Kai with wide eyes. 2.5 years? But I thought that Nightingale was just on hiatus because of Gale's solo project. Oh, there's a Gale too. I can't even. Kai smiled apologetically. I'm afraid not. I have indeed spent all this time here, in the Dark City. My agency had to come up with some cover story, I guess. With how things are, they can't even spin things and release a posthumous album. Poor guys. You know, since I'm not technically dead, or even hollow, just asleep. Nephis gave him a shy nod. Oh, I see. Trying to remove the awkward atmosphere, Kai offered her another smile. By the way, it's so nice to meet another friend of Sunny's. What a surprise! I thought that he was a complete, solitary person. I'm sorry, but I didn't catch your name. Was it Neph? Looking at him, Sunny grinned. Then he cleared his throat and said in a relaxed tone, Oh, right, I forgot to introduce you. Sorry, my bad. Knight, this is Nephis, although these days she goes by another name. You might have heard it. Meet Changing Star of the Immortal Flame Clan. Now it was Kai's turn to stare at Neph with horror. The corner of his eye twitched. However, perhaps due to his idle training, he managed to hide his emotions much faster. Blinking a few times, he lingered for a moment, and then said in a smooth, enchanting voice, Oh, it's a pleasure to meet you, my lady. I have heard so much about you. It's an honor. Nephis turned away, trying to hide a hint of blush on her cheeks. Staring at the wall of the alley, she hesitated, then awkwardly said, So, your friend is already here, Sunny. Can we go and have a talk now? She glanced at him and added after a bit of hesitation, I have something important to discuss with you. It's a matter of life and death. Chapter 171. Tether. Sunny blinked a couple of times, digesting her words. A matter of life and death. If Nephis used these words, the situation was indeed dire. She was not someone to throw words to the wind. However, she was also not to be trusted. No matter how much Sunny wanted for things between them to go back to the way they had been before, he knew that it was impossible. There was no way back for either of them. Sunny knew the true face of Changing Star now. He had seen the endless force of her conviction. In the flaming white inferno of her soul, all things were reduced to ash. Human concepts like loyalty, mercy, and affection had no hope of escaping that annihilation. No matter what bonds connected them, Sunny could not trust Nephis to put them above her boundless obsession. If push came to shove, she would sacrifice anything, or anyone, to achieve her goal, including him. At least, that was what he believed. What's more, despite the fact that she tried to hide it,
Sunny could feel that Neff's demeanor toward him had changed as well. He couldn't tell how exactly, but there was something almost imperceptibly different about how she looked at him. Once broken, trust was not easy to put back together. Perhaps it was simply impossible. And yet, despite all that, was he really capable of refusing her plea for help? Sunny sighed and closed his eyes for a moment. No. No, he didn't think he was. Even if things between them became strained, she was still one of the only two people he cared about in this world. The way he felt toward Neff was almost like a second flaw. No matter how much he wanted to, he just couldn't get rid of it. Somewhere along the way, it had taken root in his soul. He had hoped that it will wither and die if they were apart, but instead, it just grew stronger. And now there was no escape from it. Sunny could feel himself being pulled back into the mess of humanity once again. Damn it. This was exactly why he had been reluctant to return here. After suffering so much to leave it all behind, why would he ever want to abandon his peaceful, pleasant, delightful life of solitude? Curses. But he just couldn't refuse Neff. However, that didn't mean that he was going to become her compliant sidekick again. Even if they were going to work together, they were going to do it on his terms. Focus, you came here to purchase memories to feed for the souled saint. Changing Star was looking at him expectantly. Sunny tried to appear confident and casual as he said, We can have a talk, but not right now. I'll come find you when I'm done with my business. Whatever it was she wanted to discuss, it could not be extremely urgent. After all, Nephis had no idea that he was going to return from the ruins today. If there was no time to waste, she would not be wasting it on him, logically. Changing Star was silent for a few moments, her face indifferent. Then, finally, she answered in a flat tone. That is fine. You know where to go. Sunny smiled. Oh, and if you don't mind, I'll bring Night with me. Both of them stared at him with the same doubtful expression. You will? Turning to the charming young man, Sunny pretended to be surprised by his question. Don't you want to meet my other friends? They'll be able to answer all of your stupid questions for sure. Knight hesitated. I guess? Wonderful. Sunny gave him a nod and glanced at Nephis, who was clearly wondering if her idol could really be trusted. It's decided then. Now, if you'll excuse us. Truth be told, he didn't trust the pretty archer that much either. But his ability to detect lies would come in incredibly handy during the conversation with Changing Star. She was the one and only graduate of Sunny's School of Deception and Lies, after all. Pushing Kai away, he waited until they were at an appropriate distance and asked, So, what did you find out about the memories? Soon enough, they were entering the bright castle. Sunny felt strange returning to this splendid, suffocating place. This time he came as a guest of a well-regarded resident, not as a slum dweller seeking to exchange a soul shard for a moment of respite from the cold, darkness, and terror. The guards did glance at him with disdain, but remained passive. Walking under the swinging skulls, they entered the familiar hall of beautiful colored glass windows. The opulent desk that Harper used to sit behind was still there, only now a similarly downtrodden young woman was scribbling on a piece of parchment instead. The world didn't care about the death of one little human. It just moved on, instantly replacing that which was lost, forgetting it. Sunny grimaced. So, you did find me some memories to buy? What are the prices? Kai smiled, gestured him to follow, and said, I did you one better. I actually managed to get an invitation to the memory market. Sunny frowned. What? Never heard of it. The charming young man gave him a nod. That's not surprising. It's a place where you can peruse various memories and purchase them for an acceptable price. I'd say acceptable, but you know who has all the shards in this place. So usually they only let the members of the host in. Made sense? Gunlag would never allow memories to freely circulate among people who did not belong to him. The guards and hunters, though, needed a place to exchange memories that didn't fit their aspects for either shards or something that did. Then how did you get the invitation? Kai shrugged. It's not that hard if you have the shards. Problem is, very few of us free folk do. To Sunny's surprise, they actually entered one of the forbidden areas of the castle. After walking down a few long corridors and going down several flights of stairs, a sturdy wooden door appeared before them. There was a symbol of a sword and a shield drawn on it. Winking at him, Knight opened the door and walked inside. Sunny followed. Once he saw the interior of the room, his eyes glistened with excitement. Chapter 172 Memory Market. Behind the door there was a medium-sized hall that had no windows. It was illuminated by a strange lantern that levitated in its center, radiating a bright and stable glow. Along the walls of the room stood various weapon racks, wooded mannequins dressed in full suits of armor, and tables with a wide assortment of beautiful and intriguing objects placed upon them. All of it, the weapons, the armors, the objects, even the levitating lantern, were memories. Sunny felt a thundering thought explode in his mind. For a few moments, he was only able to think about one thing. Money! That is so much money! Inside this unassuming hall hid a fortune that could rival that of an entire corporation. He was barely stopping himself from drooling. Sunny? Brought back from his covetous stupor, Sunny blinked a couple of times and glanced at Kai. Huh? The beautiful archer hesitated for a moment, then said, I was saying, this is Stev. He is in charge of this place. Only now did Sunny notice that there was someone else in the room. It was a man that was old by the standards of the Dark City, nearing 25 or so. He had a round face and cheerful eyes, which were currently full of doubt and hints of disgust. His gaze, of course, was aimed at Sunny. Have you looked in the mirror, bastard? Apart from his extremely tall stature, there was only one other special thing about Stev's appearance, and it was that he was fat. He was the first obese person that Sunny had met in the Dark City. Having a belly like that in a place like this must have required a lot of work, talent, and dedication. He didn't know whether to be impressed or appalled. In any case, Sunny decided to not get on Stev's bad side. He wouldn't want to get eaten by this ogre, after all. Nice to meet you, Stev. I'm Sunny. The ample giant looked down at him, then glanced at Kai, and said in a strange voice, Knight, my dear friend, are you sure this dirty vagrant is a customer? Sunny frowned. Be civil, be civil. Hey, fat bastard, are you sure that this dirty vagrant won't break every bone in that fat blob you have for a body? In the dead silence, both Kai and Stev stared at him with wide eyes. Then Stev leaned back and let out a thunderous laugh. This little gremlin is a funny one, Knight. Well, good, very good. If there's one thing I like in this cave, it's entertainment. Chuckling, he shook his head and said, Still, my goods aren't cheap, my dear friend. Sunny, a good memory will cost you 12 shards, at least. Much more if you want something really useful. Are you sure you have the means to shop here in my emporium? How many shards can a slum rat like you have? Sunny blinked. I think there was a misunderstanding. Have you seen me? Do I look like someone who would ever be able to buy something from you? Of course not. I've never even absorbed a single soul shard. That should tell you how many of them I have. Kai gave him a strange look. Because of how confident Sunny had been while traversing the ruins, he must have assumed that his companion was sufficiently powerful. However, now he was suddenly learned that Sunny had never absorbed any soul essence. With his ability to sense lies, the charming archer would know that it was the truth. Well, of course it was. He absorbed plenty of shadow fragments instead. Sunny gave away that misleading secret on purpose. He didn't want Knight to start questioning the amount of soul shards he was about to spend, letting the archer think that he was too obsessed with wealth to expend any on increasing his power would, hopefully, lessen the impact a bit. Meanwhile, Sunny shook his head. No, Kai here is the one who'll be handing you the shards. I'm just here to point him at all the right ones. I have an eye for good memories, you see. By which he meant that his eyes were literally capable of peering into the very essence of memories and discerning their true traits. But neither of them needed to know that. Stev scratched the back of his head. Well, in that case, take a look around. Ask me any questions if something catches your eye. Then he glanced at Knight and scoffed. You could have just asked me for advice, you know. It's not like I can lie to you. Kai smiled with embarrassment. Yeah, sorry. When Stev walked away, he leaned to Sonny and whispered, So, the favor you wanted from me is to pretend to buy a memory and then give it to you so that no one knew that you have a hidden ace? Sonny stared at him. Actually, it was a good theory. Having a weapon or tool that no one knew about was a very good advantage. Unfortunately, Kai didn't really know who he was dealing with. Sonny shook his head. No, I don't want you to buy a memory on my behalf. Then, with an earnest smile, he added, I want you to buy around 10. Kai's beautiful green eyes widened. Leaving the charming archer stuck, dumb, and speechless, Sonny walked away and started perusing the various memories on display. There were a lot of them. By his estimations, at least 100, if not more. All sorts of weapons immediately attracted his attention. There were straight swords, curved swords, estocks and rapiers, scimitars and sabers. Various daggers and knives called to him, shining in the bright light on the enchanted lanterns. There were a dozen or so of pole arms, from spears to glaives to halberds to naginatas. Several battle axes were displayed nearby. Further away, boar hammers, maces, and flails radiated a silent feeling of crushing force. A few bows received a dreamy look from Kai. There were suits of armor, too, from leather to metal, light to heavy, scale to plate. Elegant, unrefined, graceful, barbarous. Whatever a person could wish for. Some of them were shaped like actual armor. Others looked like cloth garments. Placed on tables, various objects begged for his attention. Gods only knew what enchantments they possessed. Well, to be precise, gods and Stev. And Sonny. Walking among the memories, he would periodically place his hand on them. Immediately, the inner weave of the memory would be laid bare to his eyes, which were changed forever by the drop of Weaver's ichor. Studying the logic of the weave, he was able to glimpse its purpose. Of course, there weren't any truly remarkable memories in this hall. Who would want to sell something like that? However, even then, he managed to separate really good ones from simply acceptable from borderline awful. That last category was what he had came here for. Quantity over quality, remember? Sonny was almost done choosing the absolute worst memories out of all of them when his sight suddenly fell on a badly illuminated corner. In that corner, covered in a thick layer of dust, stood a seemingly discarded suit of armor. When Sonny saw it, his hand slightly trembled. Chapter 173. Black Armor. For a moment, Sonny froze. However, a second later he continued to behave just like before, as if nothing had happened. The first rule of haggling. Never let the enemy see that you're interested in buying something. And Sonny was dead set on haggling until Stev's ears started to bleed today. Pretending as though he had not noticed the dusty armor, he walked around a bit more, slowly approaching the corner where it was displayed. Judging by the neglect with which the armor was kept, the master of the memory market did not know its true value. Sonny really wanted to keep it that way, because, if he was right, that armor was much more valuable than anything else here. He didn't know for sure, but suspected that it was nothing short of a true treasure, because he recognized it. The suit of ancient plate armor was jet black in color, its design intricate and solemn. It radiated a feeling of dark resolve and stalwart adamantine grace. All parts of it were perfectly fitted to one another, creating an almost seamless barrier of impenetrable steel. Or rather, stone. Because the dusty armor was almost exactly the same as the one the stone saint was wearing. Of course, there were some differences. For starters, this one was somehow more impressive. It felt as though it had once belonged to a creature of a higher status than the steadfast shadow. While Shadow's armor was made out of dark granite, this one was cut out of pure black onyx. Its glossy surface seemed to absorb and devour any light that fell on it. And that was just in its dormant state. Once it was animated like that of the stone saint, who knew how fearsome it could become? Why was this treasure gathering dust in a badly lit corner of the memory market? Sonny frowned. Yes, he was most likely the only person in the Dark City who had seen the formidable living statues up close. But still, everything about the onyx armor screamed about how incredible of a memory it was. What was it doing here, neglected and seemingly forgotten? He had a lot of questions. Finally, he managed to reach the armor without showing how interested in it he was. With a false expression of boredom on his face, Sonny raised a hand and absent-mindedly put it on the jet-black breastplate. A moment later, his mask of boredom almost cracked. His pupils widened. What he saw beneath the surface of the armor shocked him to his core. The weave of ethereal diamond strings inside it was on a completely another level from anything he had ever seen. It was much more complex and vast than even that of the puppeteer's shroud, which was not surprising, considering that there were no less than 6 glowing embers connecting it all together. And those embers were much larger and brighter than those inside his current memories. Sonny gulped. In front of him, covered in dust, was an ascended memory of the 6th tier, something that only a fallen terror could leave behind. Jackpot. His glee, however, did not last long. Almost instantly, Sonny noticed that there was something wrong with the weave of the onyx armor. It was damaged. Thousands of strings were torn apart, leaving the whole pattern broken and full of disharmony. Instead of flowing seamlessly, they floated in the darkness, untethered from each other and the nexuses. The whole thing was a mess. That's why he couldn't feel any logic or purpose in the weave. It was simply not there anymore. Sonny frowned. How could a memory stay damaged beyond repair? That didn't make any sense. Memories were supposed to repair themselves inside the Soul Sea as long as they were not completely destroyed. This rule was pretty much universal. It couldn't be broken. Unless... A seed of understanding appeared in his mind. However, before Sonny could elaborate on his idea, Stev chuckled and put a giant hand on his shoulder. What an awesome armor, right, my dear friend Sonny? Saying that, he leaned forward and laughed. Throughout Sonny's exploration of the memory market, Stev had approached him several times to describe the most alluring qualities of his wares or simply to chat. He was obviously bored out of his mind in this windowless hall. Sonny stared at him and blinked a couple of times. If only he knew what kind of priceless treasure this is, fool. Of all the pieces of crap in this market of yours, this one is by far the most outrageous. I can hardly believe that you had the audacity to show it to people. By which he meant that it was genuinely the best memory in this whole room, if not the whole castle. Except for Gunlaug's golden armor, of course. However, if it sounded as though he was blaming Stev for being shameless and trying to sell people an utter piece of crap, well, he couldn't do anything about that, right? Stev sighed. Usually I would get into an argument and try to defend my inventory, but I really can't disagree this time. This armor, no matter how awesome it looks, is indeed absolutely useless. It has been here from long before I was put in charge of the market, actually. I even consider it to be a sort of mascot. Sonny scratched the back of his head. How come no one has ever bought it? He was pretty sure that he knew, but needed to hear what was Stev's explanation to glean how much the giant man understood. Stev shrugged. Why would anyone buy it? Have you not noticed that it's made of stone? Like, actual stone? It's so heavy that not even Tesai can move it under all the weight. Maybe an Awakened would be able to, but to us sleepers, wearing this armor is pretty much like trying to walk around dressed in a mountain. And that stone is not that hard to break, too. He looked at the onyx armor and sighed. Actually, this armor is quite a story. It once belonged to a member of the legendary cohort that conquered this castle. Some even say that it belonged to the First Lord himself. Supposedly, it had an enchantment that made it much lighter back then. He looked at the armor with doubt. But when they were fighting some ancient terror, maybe the spire messenger who lived here, the armor was seriously damaged. Something went very wrong, and the enchantment was broken, and it turned into a piece of stone. And so damaged that even the spell can't make sense of it, simply describing it as unknown that, unknown this. Sonny had to force himself to not hold his breath. The stone saint was, supposedly, created by one of the unknown. It made sense that the armaments of her kind were too. Regardless, it didn't matter that much. He was pretty sure that he knew why the onyx armor was remaining in its dormant form and couldn't repair itself. It had to do with the difference between the sleepers and the awakened. Once a sleeper finished his trial by walking through a gateway, they would take the final steps to becoming a true awakened. Their way of entering the dream realm would change, their aspect would unlock a second ability, and their core would evolve to the next rank. There was a quantitative power in jump, but the most part of the difference came from the qualitative one. Chapter 174 Shopping Spree. Just like dreamers gained the ability to perceive and interact with soul cores, awakened were able to interact with soul essence. By channeling it inside their bodies, they were able to utilize it more efficiently and achieve greater results. The ability to channel soul essence was also vital to unlocking the full potential of higher rank memories. Besides the general rarity of such memories, there was another reason why legacy clans did not just equip their scions with weapons of tremendous power and let them sail to the gateway without meeting any resistance. It was because sleepers simply had no way to activate powerful enchantments. Even Gunlaug was mostly using his transcendent armor just for its durability, with a single passive enchantment serving as a nice but unimportant bonus. In the hand of an awakened with the ability to channel soul essence into it, the golden armor would have been much more formidable. Which is where the paradox that rendered the onyx armor unusable came into play. From his experience dealing with the stone saint, Sonny knew that her armor, just like the strange creature itself, had a very special spell weave. It was, in essence, a living armament. Unlike most memories that could function on their own, it was simply a piece of dead stone when the main enchantment wasn't active. So, after the onyx armor was damaged, it had to be awoken with soul essence to assume its true form and repair itself. However, there was no human on the Forgotten Shore capable of channeling soul essence, and so it remained broken, which in turn made it useless to all the humans here. What a shame that I'll be able to buy it for a measly sum of soul shards from these fools and feed it to my shadow. Ha! Sonny didn't really care whether the armor was intact or not. All they cared about was that it had 6 ascended embers that his stone saint could devour. Maybe she'll even gain something extra because of her close affinity with the armor. After all, they came from the same source. For a moment, Sonny considered that the idea of his shadow might refuse to destroy the memory for the same reason, but then discarded it. She was just a shadow after all. His will was her will, right? Now all that remained was to make the purchase. Sonny scoffed. So it's, just a decoration. How tacky. Shaking his head, he threw one last glance at the onyx armor, forced himself to turn away, and continued to walk around the memory market. 10 minutes later, he walked over to Kai and silently handed him the rucksack. Then he named the memories he wanted him to buy. The charming young man blinked a couple of times, then said, Wait, you weren't joking? You really want to buy 10 memories? Sonny frowned at him and hissed. Keep your voice down. We need people to think that you're the one buying them, remember? Kai hesitated, then massaged his temples. Sonny, my friend, Don't take it the wrong way, but you do know how much memories cost, right? Instead of answering, Sonny gestured to the rucksack. Open it, you idiot. The archer sighed and opened the clasp of the rucksack. Then he almost dropped it. Inside the crude backpack, dozens of soul shards were softly glowing in the dark. There were around 70 of them in there, at least. Kai's hands trembled. Raising his head, he stared at Sonny with wide eyes and whispered with horror. Sonny, where did you get all these shards? 70 shards was more than most of the people in the Dark City would see in their lifetime. The contents of the unassuming rucksack were enough to start a chain of bloody conflicts that could culminate in a small war. Sonny stared at him and shrugged. What do you mean? They were just gathering dust in my bedroom. I would bring more, but the rest wouldn't fit in the rucksack. Kai looked as though he was on the verge of fainting. Then he blushed in embarrassment. I bet he's remembering how he was bragging about being rich and tried to bribe me with a promise of 10 whole shards, which, in his words, was a small fortune. Ha! While Sonny was silently gloating, a sudden shadow ran over the beautiful archer's face. In a small voice, he said, Wait, Sonny, did you say bedroom? Sonny raised an eyebrow. Sure, why? Kai shut his eyes. So you actually live in the cathedral? There was no point in denying it anymore, really. That's right. Looking at Sonny with a pleading expression, the charming young man asked, Then what about the fallen devil? Is there really a fallen devil in that cathedral? Sonny looked at him with confusion. That bastard. Yep, he's there. What about him? A shaky breath escaped from Kai's mouth. Looking weak and defeated, he shook his head, opened his mouth, then closed it again and simply stared at a wall for some time. He had the look of a man who suddenly realized that nothing in the world made sense anymore. When Kai finally regained his ability to speak, his enchanting voice sounded strangely listless. I'll go by the memories, I guess. Sonny offered him a bright smile. That'd be great, thanks. Shaking his head, the archer called Stev over and slowly listed the memories that Sonny told him to buy, including the damaged onyx armor. With each next one he named, Stev's expression grew weirder and weirder. By the end, he was almost green. Night, buddy. I really don't want to offend our friend Sonny and your choice of advisors, but you literally chose the 10 worst memories I have in the inventory, by far. If it was anyone else, I would have been ecstatic to get rid of them. But I simply can't do this to you. Please reconsider. Kai glanced at Sonny, asking what to do. It seemed that he didn't want to see his new friend make a terrible mistake. Sonny smiled. Worst, you say? You said it yourself, right? Everyone heard that? I guess you'll give us a big discount then. Steb stared at him with a bizarre expression on his face. Then he said, I don't think you understand. When I say worst, what I mean is that they're trash. Complete trash. You do understand what trash means, right? Sonny shrugged. Well, you know what they say. One man's trash is another man's breakfast. Wait, no. Another man's, treasure? Yeah, treasure. That's right. Some time later, in an empty corridor of the bright castle, Kai took Sonny by the hand. A moment later, several sparks of energy traveled between them. Sonny tilted his head and listened to the silence. Soon he heard the faintly familiar voice of the spell whisper, You have received a memory. You have received a memory. You have received a memory. After the 10th announcement, everything grew quiet again. Sonny grinned. Just like that, he had gained 10 memories to feed to his shadow. He even managed to purchase a Tier 6 Ascended armor for the laughable sum of 7 soul shards. What a bargain. It's good to be rich. However, soon the grin disappeared from his face. Instead, something dark glistened in his eyes. It was time to have a talk with Nephis. Chapter 175. Reunion. On the way out of the castle, Kai was strangely silent. Sunny didn't mind because he had a lot to think about. Going back to that lodge, there were a lot of things that he had hoped to never see, feel, or experience again. For a moment, he even thought about rushing straight back to his cathedral without making good on his promise. But why should he? It's not like he asked to be invited back. Nephis was the one who wanted his help with something. Just pretend like you don't care. Also demand to be compensated for whatever it is they want you to do. You're an outsider now, and your services won't be cheap. Yeah, that was the best option. He wasn't going to agree to anything that didn't serve his own selfish interests. And there were a lot of things that Changing Star, with her thriving hunting party and following, could provide him with. There was this one thing in particular, something he really wanted to do, but couldn't on his own. Maybe they would be able to help him with that. As they were approaching the lodge, Kai suddenly asked in a serious tone, "Sunny, why did you want me to come with you, really?" Sunny sighed. Glancing at the charming archer, he hesitated, then said, "I want you to tell me if I'm being lied to." Kai frowned. "I thought that Lady Nephis was your friend. Why are you so wary of her?" Sunny chuckled. Was she a friend? Even he didn't know what exactly the two of them were to each other. Worse yet, he wasn't sure what they would become. "She's the kind of friend you don't really want to lower your guard around." He lingered for a moment, then added, "There's also a guy called Castor. He is the one I especially don't trust." The archer raised his eyebrows. "I've only good things about Castor. Why him specifically?" Sunny cast a sideways glance at him and scowled. To be honest, Castor hadn't really done anything to deserve his hostility, but there was just something about the proud legacy that gave Sunny a familiar feeling. He was too perfect. In Sunny's experience, only people with bad intentions were capable of appearing so flawless. Perhaps he was wrong, but the policy of always assuming the worst had too clean of a track record to be abandoned now. "He just gives me the creeps." Seemingly satisfied with this answer, Kai shrugged and followed Sunny into the lodge. The headquarters of Changing Star's hunting party had changed a lot since his last visit. It had already looked pretty presentable back when he was a member, but now the lodge was much more impressive. The first thing that caught the eye that it had grown much bigger. During the month of his absence, additional structures were built to expand it both horizontally and vertically. Now it was by far the largest building in the outer settlement, almost starting to resemble a small town hall. It was heavily fortified too, especially from the side that faced the white road. A couple of lookouts were visible on the roof, observing the ruins below. They were wearing armor-type memories and holding bows in their hands. It was a far cry from how things were before. Inside, a lot of people were busy with various tasks. Sunny froze for a moment, disoriented by all the activity. He almost felt as though he had somehow mistakenly returned to the castle. The reason for it was not the neat and tastefully decorated interior, with warm carpets covering the stone floor and various tapestries hanging on the sturdy stone walls. No, the main difference was in how the people here comported themselves. The rot of hopelessness was almost gone from their eyes, replaced with energy and vigor. Sunny frowned. Why hasn't Gunlag put an end to all of this yet? From everything that he saw, Nephis was almost asking to be destroyed. How was all of this possible? His grim thoughts were disrupted by a young woman who greeted them with a smile. "Welcome. Can I help you with something?" Sunny stared at the smiling girl, trying to remember if he knew her. No one came to mind. Trying to remove the scowl from his face, he answered in a flat tone. "Neph is expecting me." The young woman blinked. Sorry? Who is Neph?" Sunny rolled his eyes. "Sorry, Lady Nephis is expecting me. You know, Changing Star of the Immortal Flame Clan." The young woman's eyes widened. "Oh, I see. Let me show you the way." Sunny wanted to retort that he knew the way, but truth be told, he wasn't sure that he did. With all the changes that happened to the lodge, he had no idea where things were. On their way, they passed the tiny room that used to belong to him. Just as they were walking by, Sonny glanced inside and saw that it was now home to someone else. In fact, he recognized a couple of things that the new owner left in the narrow cot. They were Castor's. A corner of his mouth curled upward. Figures. It seemed as though he was thoroughly replaced by the scion of the Hanli clan. Well, whatever. The cot was not very comfortable anyway, unlike his luxurious wide bed in the hidden chamber of the cathedral. Finally, the young woman led them to the area that used to be the central hall of the old lodge. Now it was separated from the rest of it by a thick wall, with a sturdy wooden door barring the way inside. Sonny took a deep breath, then walked in. He had imagined that moment a lot of times in the past. Granted, he never thought that his reunion with the cohort would happen in the presence of an unreasonably attractive, washed-out pop star, but still. Inside the room, a wide window opened onto an eerily breathtaking view of the dark city. On the wall beside it, a map of the ruins was littered with various markings that contained valuable information. They seemed to be much denser than before. There was a large wooden table beside the window, around which stood 7 makeshift chairs. Currently, only 2 were occupied. Effie was sitting on one, her feet unceremoniously resting on the table. As always, she looked extremely comfortable and relaxed. On the chair next to her, a beautiful blind girl was cradling a cup in her delicate hands. It was Cassie. Nephis and Castor stood near the map, discussing something with each other. The 4 of them were the core of the Immortal Flame hunting party. Once Sonny and Kai entered, everyone turned to them. Sonny put on a brave face and forced a grin. "Oh, so many familiar faces. Hi, everyone. No need to say how much you missed me. Anyway, this is Kai. Kai, say hi to everyone. These are Cassie, Castor, and Effie. You already know Nephis." Giving him a strange look, the charming archer smiled dazzlingly and said in his stupidly beautiful voice, Hello, Lady Nephis, Cassie, Castor, Huntress Athena. It's very nice to meet you." Cassie giggled. "Ha, you won't believe it, guys. I thought I just heard Knight from Nightingale say my name. Crazy, right?" Kai blinked. "Oh, sorry, I am Knight from Nightingale, actually." Effie leaned forward and extended one arm. Cassie's face, meanwhile, grew deathly pale. An expression of utter terror appeared on it. Her hands trembled, and the cup she was holding fell from them. Catching the cup just a moment before it hit the floor, Effie sighed and shook her head. "Every time. This happens every time." Sonny furrowed his brow and glanced at the beautiful archer with disdain. Oh, come on. Was that reaction really necessary? Chapter 176. Coming Clean. The 4 people in the room reacted to his arrival differently. Nephis seemed to be indifferent, as always. However, Sonny knew her well enough to notice a strange tension hiding in the depths of her calm gray eyes. Castor greeted him with an amiable smile, but there was coldness hiding behind it. It seemed as though the handsome scion was not happy about this turn of events. Did he see him as a rival for Neff's attention, or was there more to it? In any case, it was not Sonny's problem. He did not plan on returning to the cohort on a permanent basis. Castor could have all the attention to himself. Effie looked at him with a genuine surprise. "Doofus, you are actually alive?" Sonny blinked and stared at her for a few moments, then said in an acrid tone, "Sorry to disappoint." She shook her head. No, just how the hell did you manage to survive 3 whole months in the ruins?" He grinned. "What can I say? I had a good teacher." Since Effie was the one who taught him how to navigate the Dark City, that compliment was directed at her. However, the huntress simply shook her head. "No student of mine would be stupid enough to actually live in the ruins, not to mention returning looking so feral." "Do I look feral?" Sonny took a mental picture of himself. Ragged clothes, dirty hair, a crooked grin, a hint of madness burning in his eyes. No, he couldn't see anything wrong with how he looked. In fact, he thought he looked great. With an offended frown, he glanced at Effie and said, "Yeah, well, you look like you've gained a little weight. In all the right places. Focus, fool." The hunters glared at him for a few moments, then laughed. "A girl gotta eat, but also wanna die." And finally, there was Cassie. Cassie seemed to have changed the most out of all of them. The changes were not instantly apparent, but to Sunny, who knew her so well, they were unmistakable. The blind girl seemed more mature? She looked older, somehow. It was as if there was an invisible weight pressing down on her, the kind that people usually accumulated with the flow of years. Her demeanor was calmer, more restrained, almost cold. "Welcome back, Sonny. I'm so happy that you're all right." Giving him a polite smile, she grew silent and turned away. This wasn't exactly the kind of welcome he had expected from her. He had been sure that the blind girl would give him a hug at least. That was how it always happened in his head. Maybe she is shy because of Kai? However, Sonny had a feeling that he already knew the true reason for her subdued attitude. He just didn't want to admit it. It was the vision. That damn vision. Chasing away the feeling of dread, he sat down on one of the chairs and offered another one to Kai. "So, what did you guys want to discuss?" Nephis and Castor exchanged glances. Before saying anything, Castor walked over to the door and closed it. After that, he summoned a memory that looked like a bone flute and placed it on the table. Immediately, something in the room imperceptibly changed. Sonny raised an eyebrow. "What is that thing?" The handsome young man sat on a chair next to Changing Star and said, "This memory has an enchantment that creates a cone of silence. No one outside this room will be able to hear what we're talking about now." This fact alone was already enough to tell Sonny that they were going to discuss something that had to do with the Bright Lord, Gunlaug himself. Suddenly, he felt an irrational desire to be anywhere else but in this brightly lit room. The wide window began to look very alluring. He sighed. "So, the Bright Lord is finally ready to obliterate you all? Can't say I'm surprised. If anything, it's strange that he didn't make a move much earlier." Effie giggled. "Oh, did he ever?" Nevis glanced at her, making the huntress fall silent, and turned to Sonny. "You are right. The Bright Lord is indeed about to make a move. We have withstood his previous attacks, but they were just a rehearsal, a few provocations to test our strength. Now he is ready to act in earnest, and that's why I need your help." Sonny raised his eyebrow. "How can a cockroach like me help the great and mighty Changing Star of the Immortal Flame Clan?" Effie gave him and Nephis a strange look, then cleared her throat. "Don't take it to heart, Princess, but I sort of agree with Sonny. What can this little imp, no offense, Sonny, do that we can't? I mean, he is a decent scout, but... Hey, offense taken!" Changing Star smiled, then looked at Sonny. "Don't be misled by his act, Effie. Sonny might behave like a cowardly weakling, but in fact he is the last person in the Dark City I would want to face in combat. He is far more dangerous than anyone thinks he is. Isn't that right, Sonny?" The smile froze on his face. A few moments passed in silence, with everyone staring at him. Finally, Sonny sighed. "Oh well, I guess the secret is out of the box. Surprise, everyone, I am actually not a weakling. Who could have thought?" Then he glared at Effie and added in a mocking tone, "Oh, my mistake. Actually, everyone except for you already knew. It seems that you are—" However, Neff interrupted him. That's why he was able to survive 3 months in the ruins. Just like he had survived 2 in the labyrinth. Sonny is an extremely formidable fighter. Wow, is she trying to flatter me? He's just a bit of a devious asshole, but that's exactly what makes him so dangerous. I guess not. Looking at Effie, Sonny shrugged and smirked. "If you don't believe her, just ask Knight." Sonny, suddenly dragged into the conversation, Kai coughed, hesitated for a moment, and then said, Yes, I can confirm. He is indeed a bit of an asshole. Sunny's face twitched. Not that! Tell them how I saved you! The charming archer fluttered his eyelashes with an innocent look, then added, Oh, right. Indeed, Sunny saved me in the ruins last night. He is a very exceptional and resourceful individual. Sunny glanced at Effie with triumph. He didn't really want to provoke the tall huntress any further, but she did call him a little imp. See, Knight has known me for just one night, but even he was able to see how fearsome I am. You and I, on the other hand, had hunted together for an entire month. How come you're so dense? Whatever, it was not like he would be spending a lot of time with Effie. Let her boil with anger. With a teasing smile on his lips, Sunny turned to Nephis and asked, Anyway, what exactly do you want me to do? Changing Star hesitated, then said, I want you to take Effie to your hideout in the ruins and keep her safe there for about a week. Sunny blinked. Oh no. I'm dead. Chapter 177 Cloak and Dagger. Sunny grew silent and tried very hard not to look at the huntress, who was glaring at him with murder in her eyes. Did he hear it right? Excuse me. Keep her safe? Nephis gave him a nod, then hesitated for a few moments and sighed. I guess I owe you an explanation. With a frown, she glanced at the map of the Dark City. Her gaze was fixed on the symbol of a tower drawn in the center with white paint. The Bright Castle. After a few moments, she said, You asked why Gunlaug hasn't killed us all yet. That is a good question. However, the answer is complicated. Changing Star turned her head and looked at Sunny. Partially, it's because I have not challenged him openly yet. I also haven't done anything to justify an intervention. Everything we have accomplished for the benefit of the outer settlement not only fell outside the purview of his reign over the castle, but also strengthened the human position on the Forgotten Shore overall. Officially, he has no grounds to accuse me. Sunny scoffed. It's not really like Gunlaug really needs justification. He only needs the pretense of one, and even then just barely. Nephis slightly frowned. You are right. If he really wanted to escalate the situation and bring about an open conflict, he could have easily created a reason. Alternatively, he could have sent Horus under the cover of night to make me disappear without a trace. But he didn't. And we are not entirely sure why. Sunny blinked. You don't know? Glancing at Castor, Nev shook her head. There are several possible reasons. Perhaps he is uncertain if Horus will be able to dispose of me. Perhaps he is just using the growing status of the outer settlement as a deterrent against his lieutenant's ambitions. Perhaps he is just confident and patient. Whatever the case, Gunlaug more or less tolerated our existence for these past 4 months. Castor sighed and added, Of course, there were still challenges we had to overcome. If we weren't cautious in how we dealt with these provocations, things would have been very different. Changing Star nodded. Indeed. There were several attempts to taunt us into confrontation already. Nothing too bloody, though. However, things seem to have changed. We received word from the castle that Gunlaug is going to act against us soon. This time he is aiming at one of my companions. The attack will be a serious one, and the target is Effie. Sunny glanced at the unruly huntress and raised his eyebrows. He had a lot of questions. Why her? Castor clenched his fist. It could have been any of us, really, but Effie, despite all my warnings, got into a rather vulgar argument with a bunch of guards who came into the outer settlement for some entertainment. Coincidentally, some of these guards went missing last night. No one knows what happened to them. Sunny was pretty sure that he knew exactly what had happened to them, though. After all, he was the one who killed them. Castor didn't need to know any of this, though. Actually, I might know something about that, Kai suddenly said, smiling like an idiot. Who asked that fool to open his mouth? He tried to make the archer shut up with a murderous stare, but it was already too late. Kite enthusiastically went on to describe how he was kidnapped, put in the well, and then rescued by a mysterious stranger, who turned out to be Sunny. Luckily, he was under the impression that the kidnappers were all slaughtered by the Black Knight, not realizing that Sunny was the one who had lured them into the cathedral in the first place, after personally killing their leader. If Kai knew the full truth, things might have turned rather awkward. After he was done talking, Castor sighed. "Thank you. This is a very valuable piece of information. Sadly, it doesn't change anything. Effie is still in danger. The Bright Lord is going to use her as a hostage and force Lady Nephis to challenge him. If she does, he will kill her. If she doesn't, Effie will die, and our reputation will be ruined. Either way, he wins." Sunny cast a sideways glance at Effie, who was still relaxed and seemingly undisturbed by the prospect of dying horribly in the dungeons of the Bright Castle. In fact, she was currently more interested in fishing out a piece of meat that was stuck between her pearly teeth and not paying Castor any attention. What a lunatic, Sunny thought with scorn, making his shadow shake its head at the irony of that statement. Turning to Nephis and Castor, he asked, "How do you know all of this?" In fact, this question was moot. He already had the idea. To receive information about Gunlock's plans, they had to have a spy in the castle. More than that, given the nature of the information, it had to be someone of considerable rank. Perhaps even someone in the inner circle of the Bright Lord. Was Neph working with one of the lieutenants? Sunny counted the number of chairs in the room. There were 7 chairs, but only 6 people. Interesting. Castor hesitated, then reluctantly said, "We have an ally." Sunny decided not to press the issue any further. Frankly, he didn't really want to know. There was just one last question he wanted to ask. "I see. Well, there is one thing I don't really understand. You said to keep Effie safe for a week. What is going to change in a week? I doubt that Gunlock will magically forget everything after a few days." A heavy silence descended on the room. No one seemed to want to speak first. After a few moments passed, Nephis finally broke the silence. Looking in the window, she leaned back and said in her usual, even, indifferent tone, "In a week, we will be ready to leave the city." Sunny almost fell from his chair. That was not what he had expected to hear. Chapter 178. Lost Expedition. Soon another map was spread on the table. This one was drawn on a piece of crude parchment made out of monster hide, and much less detailed than the one hanging on the wall. Well, that was understandable, because the second map did not depict the Dark City, but the Forgotten Shore itself. Sunny stared at it in stunned silence. Yes, Nephis had not wasted any time during these 3 months. He had no idea how she had gathered all this information, but there was a lot more on the map than he could have ever imagined. At the center of it, a straight black line depicted the Crimson Spire. The labyrinth flowed from it, devouring the parchment like an ocean of blood. To the east, a small circle of black ink was a symbol with a white tower inside of it marked the Dark City. The city was perched on the edge of another, much larger circle. It didn't take too much effort to recognize the Cyclopean crater. After all, Sunny had traversed it on a rickety boat once, a lifetime ago. However, only now, looking at it in scale, did he finally realize just how giant the crater was, and how vast the Forgotten Shore itself appeared. Back on Earth, it would have been as large as a continent. The Dream Realm was indeed much bigger than their own planet, considering that just one of its numerous regions was this enormous. There were other symbols on the map that he didn't recognize. However, several of them attracted his attention especially. On the other side of the crater, almost exactly opposite the Dark City, a symbol of a tree depicted the Ashen Barrow. Some distance to the east of it, on a straight line, there was a mark in the shape of a red cross. Another red cross was drawn inside the crater just outside the eastern side of the Dark City. The third one was about a week's worth of traveling time to the north, near a symbol that looked like a grotesque, misshapen skull. The fourth one was halfway between the ruins and the Crimson Spire. The fifth one lay to the south, about the same distance as the third, drawn atop the symbol of an arcing bridge. The last red cross was at the very edge of the parchment, far away to the south, beyond the labyrinth. Near it, two symbols were drawn. One was a crown, and the other one was a question mark. Sunny quickly realized what these crosses represented. They were the giant statues of the 7 forgotten heroes who had given the terrible oath to vanquish the darkness and created the Starlight Legion. The one to the east of the Soul Devourer was the statue of the knight that he had used as a shelter on his first night in the Dream Realm. The one near the walls of the city belonged to the woman whose hand had saved them from drowning in the dark sea on the night of their escape. The other 4 crosses, most likely, marked 4 more headless statues. But where was the 7th? Frowning, Sunny glanced at the map and said, "So, let me get this straight. You want to leave the Dark City, cross the labyrinth, reach the edges of the Forgotten Shore, and then return?" Nephis smiled. "Pretty much, yes." He sighed. "If we somehow survive the month of traveling through the labyrinth and actually manage to escape it, why the hell would we return?" The smile on her face withered. Changing Star lingered for a few moments, then pointed to the 3 symbols at the lower edge of the map, the red cross, the question mark, and the crown. The first lord of the castle led an expedition to find the way out of the Forgotten Shore. This is where their trace disappeared. From what we were able to learn, an unassailable mountain chain blocks the path to the south. They ventured into the mountains and never returned. Nothing but death awaits us there. Sunny scratched the back of his head. "So, you aren't really looking for a way out. You're looking for the remains of the cohort of sleepers that had conquered the castle 15 years ago?" Neff nodded. "There is an item that they took away from the castle. If we find it, we'll have a chance in the fight against Gunlaug." Sunny frowned. He felt as though she was not telling him everything. Maybe what little trust remained between them was not enough to share those secrets. Maybe she didn't want someone else in the room to hear them. But then again, he didn't really care. Changing Star's business was her own. Sunny was just here as a potential mercenary. As long as the reward was worth it, he was ready to not ask any questions. Provided that not knowing the answers was not going to get him killed, of course. Feeling his hesitation, Nephis added, "The way to the mountains is not as dangerous as you think. There is a method we can use to reach them comparatively safely. But once we're there, that's where we'll need your talents. Having you with us will make a lot of things easier." Sunny looked at her with doubt. "How do you know all of this? It's not like there's anyone in the Dark City who was alive back then." Nephis shrugged. "There isn't, but there are stories. Some written evidence. However, most of this we have learned from Cassie's visions." She gave the blind girl a warm look. "Cassie has helped us a lot." Sunny had to think. If Changing Star made this plan, it meant that she had good reasons to believe that it was doable. Of course, there would be danger. Nothing on the Forgotten Shore was ever safe or easy, but there was a rare opportunity in all of this, too. He felt very tempted to leave the ruins for a few months in the company of an extremely formidable cohort. Outside the walls of the Dark City, nightmare creatures were generally of a lower rank than those inside. The efficiency of his hunting would be much higher, which would lend him more shadow fragments and memories to feed the Stone Saint. Especially if powerhouses like Nephis, Effie, and Castor were fighting alongside him. But more importantly, if Cassie was there to warn them of the dangers that they had no business trying to fight. He never forgot how many times her affinity to mysteries and revelations had saved their lives in the past. Like on that awful night when they had summoned a terrifying mimic from the depths of the Dark Sea. With a true seer accompanying them, the most harrowing thing about the labyrinth, the cursed black waters, were not as unknowable and thus deadly anymore. So he was not immediately against the idea, more so because he would be additionally compensated for the efforts. But there was something else that he had to consider. Looking up, Sunny glanced at the people gathered in the room and cleared his throat. I would like to talk to Nephis alone, please. Most of them just stared at him without moving. Castor especially did not seem happy about the prospect. What is it about him and Neph? Why is he so possessive? But after Changing Star gave them a look, they reluctantly stood up and left the room one after another. Soon, Sunny and Nephis were left alone. He hesitated for a long time before finally speaking. His voice was raw and hoarse. Neph, why are you doing this? Why are you trying to pull me back? Don't you know how this will all end? She watched him silently for a while with an inexorable expression. Then she said simply, Because there's only two people I trust in this world, Sonny. One is Cassie, the other is you. I only trust you to have my back. He couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Have your back? Neph, you know what awaits the two of us in the future. This story won't have a happy ending. There'll be only sorrow, pain, and rage, remember? Changing Star lingered for a few moments. Her face was calm and firm. When the silence became almost overwhelming, she finally answered. Life is not a story, Sonny. It only ends when you die. He smiled crookedly, not knowing how to answer. So, will you help me? Sonny sighed and stood up, glancing at the map of the Forgotten Shore one last time. I don't know. I need some time to think. I'll take Effie and keep her safe for a week. You'll have the answer once we meet up again. She nodded, accepting that condition. Turning around, Sonny forced himself to appear nonchalant and left. As soon as the door closed behind him, his expression changed. Damn, I forgot to discuss my compensation. It would look really silly if he went back right now, right? Right? The shadow palmed its face, once again lamenting the stupidity of its master. Chapter 179 New Generation. Once outside, Sunny spent some time finding Effie and Kai. The two of them were in the dining area of the lodge, discussing something between themselves. There was no sign of Cassie anywhere, but he did notice Castor observing him from the stairs leading to the second floor. Is she avoiding me? Somewhat disappointed, Sunny landed on a chair next to the two locals he had come to know and gave them a dark look. Wait, the two of you know each other? Kai smiled. Who doesn't know Huntress Athena? We had, a few brushes in the past? Deciding not to inquire what type of brushes he was talking about, Sunny sighed and asked, Does she know about that particular flaw of yours? The charming young man blinked a couple of times, then said with confusion, I guess so. I don't make a secret out of it. Great. Of all the people in the world, he got stuck with two weirdos who had no qualms about telling every random stranger about their most hidden vulnerability. Well, if he had a flaw like Kai's, he wouldn't worry about it too much either. Lucky bastard. Since there was no point in pretending anymore, Sunny simply asked, Well, was anyone in that room lying? Effie grinned. Ah, so that's why you dragged Nat along. Paranoid much? Sunny would love nothing more than to ignore that question, but unfortunately his own flaw was much more restrictive than Kai's. Not at all. In fact, I think I'm exactly as paranoid as a person should be, by which I mean extremely, of course. Saying that, he looked at the charming archer with expectation. Kai hesitated for a few moments. No one said a single lie. Your friends are all extremely honest people, Sunny. Oh, you poor lamb. Not knowing how to react to that display of naivete, Sunny shook his head and lowered his voice. Not even Castor? Kai gave him a nod. No, he was honest too. Was Sunny wrong? Was Castor really just an honest and honorable guy? Was his distrust irrational? Somewhat unsure, Sunny lingered for a bit and then turned to Effie. Neff and I agreed to continue our conversation in a week. Until then, you'll be under my protection. The huntress giggled. Wow, that makes me feel real safe. Thanks, Shorty. He grimaced. Don't you worry. I might not look like much, but wait till you see my roommate. Kai suddenly choked on his drink and paled a little. Reminded of something, Sunny patted him on the back and said, Anyway, thanks for your help. Our deal is done. See you around, I guess. He was not going to miss this guy one bit. Sonny wasn't winning any prizes with his looks already, but next to Kai, he seemed downright barely above average. The charming Archer looked at him for a few moments, then forced out a smile. Yeah, it was nice to make your acquaintance, Sonny. I can honestly say that spending time with you is, an unforgettable experience. With that, he glanced at Effie with something that resembled pity, rose, and left. The two of them were left alone. The huntress looked around with a weary expression and then asked in a neutral tone, So, when do we leave? Sonny doesn't hesitate. Right now. Honestly, I can't wait to go back to the ruins. This place, it gives me the creeps. Effie gave him a strange look, then shrugged. Sure, no problem. Let's ditch this scary place and go hide in the ancient cursed ruins. At least we can feel safe there, right? Some time later, they were carefully walking through the streets of the dark city. Being here in daylight was not something Sonny was accustomed to, so he was justifiably tense. Luckily, both of them were experienced hunters and worked well together. Sonny fell into the familiar rhythm of cooperating with Effie without skipping a beat, as though 3 whole months had not passed by since they last saw each other. It was honestly nothing short of jolly. At some point, the unruly huntress glanced at him and asked, But seriously, how did you survive, Sonny? He gave her a dark look, then shrugged. How do you think? You know that I'm very good at hiding in the shadows. I slept during the day and hunted during the night. Observed my prey carefully before striking at their weak spots. If I ever met something I wasn't sure it could kill, I ran. She became thoughtful for a while, then said, It's noticeable, you know. You've changed. You feel like a true hunter now. Sonny grinned. Well, I would hope so. I hunted more nightmare creatures than was reasonable, really. She smirked. How many? That was a good question. Sonny hesitated before answering. Around 60? Yeah, no more than that, I think. Together with those terrors he had slain in the labyrinth, his kill count had long ago moved past 100. Effie blinked and looked at him with a dark expression. That many hunts in only 3 months? The number was nothing short of staggering. Actually, it was completely insane. Out in the real world, it was widely known that awakened nightmare creatures were too tough for mere sleepers to fight. Anyone who managed to prevail in a battle against one would earn themselves a proper reputation. Killing a dozen would make a person famous. If Sonny were to return home and claim that he had slaughtered 100, most of them in a cursed ruin populated by fallen abominations, the news of his accomplishment would fly around the whole planet in an instant. He would be hailed as an unparalleled genius and a hope of the entire generation. And yet, there were dozens of people just like him in the Dark City, many of them even more accomplished, much more. Effie had several hundred hunts under her belt. There were more than a couple hunters in the outer settlement whose track record was just as impressive. Even with the death of Jubei, their numbers had shrunk. Inside the bright castle there was Gunlaug himself, his 5 lieutenants, all the pathfinders of the host, more than a few experienced hunters, and even a couple of guards with a lot of battle scars to prove their prowess. All of them were at a level that sleepers simply weren't supposed to ever achieve. The Forgotten Shore was truly an interesting place. If Nephis were to somehow succeed and bring even just several of them back into the real world, how would the world change? Would other things that have been considered impossible before suddenly have their status put under scrutiny? Was it the reason why the spell gave her the name Changing Star? Was Neph destined to not only create change, but also be the catalyst of it? Consumed with these thoughts, Sonny walked through the cursed ruins. Soon a familiar shape of the cathedral appeared before his eyes. Looking at it, Sonny shuddered. He had been honest when he told Effie how he managed to survive all this time. However, he had failed to mention how close he came to dying in the process. The memory of his first visit to the cathedral, and its consequences, was something he really liked to avoid. Chapter 180. Breakpoint. It happened a few weeks after he left the castle behind. Back then, Sonny was just starting to feel confident in the absolute darkness of the cursed night. He stalked the ruins, searching for prey and slaying one monster after another. Looking back, those few victories might have gone to his head a little, or maybe he was just too sane to survive alone in the dark city. It was the first meeting with the Black Knight that caused him to lose that state of mind. Sonny did not become interested in the ruined cathedral by accident, nor was he led there by empty curiosity. In fact, he had noticed something strange about the ancient temple and decided to explore it after careful consideration, because the thing he saw was too alluring to ignore. At dawn, for a few short minutes, he could see a weak, ethereal golden glow emanating from the dark cathedral, the same golden glow he had seen twice before. Once, deep within the ruby droplets of his own blood after consuming the drop of ichor, and another time exuding from Changing Star's unconscious body after her battle with the horror of the depths. Without having to guess, Sonny knew what this golden shine was. It was the light of divinity. With his own eyes altered by the drop of divine blood, which was left on the talons of the vile thieving bird after it stole in Weaver's eye, Sonny was somehow able to perceive it. Considering that both Nephis and he possessed some measure of divine affinity, it wasn't hard to come to this conclusion. More than that, the circumstances surrounding the awakening of his ability to see the golden glow supported it. Thus, hoping to find another treasure equal to the drop of ichor, Sonny entered the ruined cathedral. Then he froze for a second, awed by its grandeur. That second was all it took for the Black Knight to skewer him on his sword. Sonny didn't know how the massive devil managed to avoid being seen by his shadow, nor how he got so close without making any noise. All he knew was that a menacing black giant suddenly stepped forward from the darkness that enveloped the temple and pierced him with a wrathful gaze. There were two scarlet flames burning in the impenetrable emptiness behind the visor of the knight's helmet. Looking at them, Sonny felt as though he was staring into the eyes of death itself. However, even though Sonny was caught by surprise, his body moved on its own. Countless hours of practice did not go to waste. In the end, it was the reflexes that Sonny had engraved into his muscles and bones that saved his life, even if only by a hair's breadth. Because of his quick reaction, the massive greatsword of the evil creature did not cut him in two. Instead, it simply disemboweled him. Feeling a blinding pain pierce his abdomen, Sonny staggered and looked down, only to see a river of blood flowing from his stomach, which was cut wide open. The red ropes of his intestines were clearly visible in the terrible wound, already on their way to falling out. The horror of seeing something that should have been inside of him moving to the outside was much more powerful than the excruciating pain of his flesh being torn apart. Pressing one hand against the wound, Sonny fell on his back and weakly tried to crawl away. However, the Black Knight was already moving, raising his greatsword to deliver the finishing blow. For a fraction of a second, everything froze. Sonny didn't have time to come up with an elaborate plan, nor even think things through. All he knew was that he had to buy himself a chance to crawl away. Somehow. Of all the memories at his disposal, nothing seemed to be of use. Not the austere and razor-sharp midnight shard, not the ominous and powerful puppeteer's shroud. His mighty Tier 5 armor did not even slow the Black Blade for a moment. Even augmented by his shadow, they were not a match for the terrifying devil of the ruined cathedral. In the end, Sonny simply thrust his hand forward and let a small and ordinary-looking rock fly from it into the depths of the ancient temple. His shadow wrapped itself around the little stone, enhancing its enchantments. In the next moment, the rock suddenly howled, replicating the scream of the last nightmare creature that Sonny had killed. Augmented by the shadow, the howl shook the walls of the cathedral, causing dust to fly into the air. The Black Knight stopped, then looked over his shoulder in the direction where the howl was coming from. He seemed to hesitate for a moment. Not wasting any time, Sonny pressed tight onto his terrible wound, rose to his feet, and staggered away, almost slipping in the puddle of his own blood. Groaning from pain, he tried to reach the exit of the old temple. Miraculously, he did. The Black Knight stopped in the doorway, simply following the small figure of the mortally wounded human with the burning flames that served him as eyes. Then it indifferently turned away and slowly returned into the darkness. Some time later, Sonny found himself lying in a ditch somewhere in the depths of the dark city. He had found his way to this ditch and crawled into it, hoping to hide himself from the monsters stalking the ruins at night. He was consumed by pain, fear, and disbelief. Was this how it was all going to end? Was this how he was going to die? He wanted to cry for help, but knew that no one would come. He wanted to simply cry, but, for some reason, nothing but laughter escaped from his lips. Funny. It was just too damn funny. An outskirt rat like him, dying in a ditch. What a fitting end. Why wouldn't he laugh? It was all just so hilarious. A laughing fit sent him into an ocean of suffering. Every time he moved, it felt as though invisible blades were cutting into his abdomen, slicing his flesh apart. And yet, he couldn't stop laughing. The funniest thing of all was that he couldn't even die. No matter how much he bled, his tenacious blood refused to give up. Guided by Bloodweave, it desperately tried to repair the damage done to his body. However, the damage was just too extensive. Even augmented by the shadow, the Bloodweave couldn't contend with it. In the end, he was locked in an endless cycle of excruciating agony, not quite alive, but also unable to die. Yet, minute after minute, hour after hour, nothing but pain and suffering drowned his consciousness, until something inside simply cracked. Who wouldn't have gone mad? Through the fog that clouded his mind, Sonny hazily realized that the sun had come up, then disappeared again. This happened a few times until he finally let out a quiet sigh. Enough was enough. He couldn't take it anymore. It was time to give up. He had a good run, really. But how could anyone endure all this? He wanted to die. He was ready. Ready. Are you? Are you really ready? Sonny thought for a bit, and then suddenly bared his teeth. Fuck no. He was not ready. Give up? Never, never. He was never going to give up. He refused to give the world the satisfaction of devouring him, not unless it choked to death on his soul. No, I'm not going to die. I'm going to live. I'm going to thrive. I'll be the last one standing, no matter what. With that thought, he summoned the Midnight Shard and gripped its hilt with the last bit of strength left in his body. Memory enchantments. Unbroken. Enchantment description. This blade refuses to be broken, and thus is durable beyond reason. It will greatly enhance the power of its wielder when they are close to death. However, only if the wielder is still unwilling to surrender. Responding to his vicious promise, the ancient blade finally opened the gate to the well of power hiding somewhere deep within his soul. Instantly, a torrent of energy filled his body with dark resolve. The power given to Sonny by the Midnight Shard enhanced the healing factor of Bloodweave, allowing it to just barely keep him from slipping over the edge of death while it slowly began to repair his ravaged body. And as long as he was almost dead, the effect of Unbroken continued to feed Bloodweave with power, creating another cycle. A virtuous cycle. A cycle of unbroken will to survive. This was how Sonny was able to live through his first encounter with the Black Knight. However, while his body eventually healed, the wound dealt to his mind remained. Days later, after Sonny finally crawled from that ditch, he was never quite the same. And he never forgot the debt he owed to the Black Knight. One day, he was going to kill the bastard, no matter the cost. And now, approaching the cathedral months later in the company of Effie, Sonny felt like that date was drawing closer. Perhaps he really should agree to participate in Neff's expedition, as long as she helps him repay that debt. Chapter 181 Rules of Hospitality. Effie regarded the cathedral for some time, then glanced at Sunny with doubt. I know for a fact that nothing comes out alive from that temple. Are you sure this is where you live? With a carefree smile, Sunny shrugged. The fact that Effie knew about the danger hiding inside the ruined church did not surprise him. Even if it was situated outside her usual hunting grounds, she had extensive knowledge of the Dark City, some from her own exploration, some from sharing information with other hunters. Dead tired and longing to return to the peaceful silence of his home, he didn't waste any time and told her about the Black Knight who guarded the cathedral. The unruly huntress scratched the back of her head. So, there's a fallen devil inside? He's the roommate you were talking about? Sunny gave her a nod. The bastard endlessly patrols the ground floor and kills anything that comes through the doors. However, if we enter through the roof and stay hidden, we can reach my living quarters without any problem. More than that, nothing will bother us once we're there, because the bastard never comes that way and obliterates anything that tries. Effie was silent for a while, then grinned. So, you basically have a devil for a butler. Pretty smart. Sunny chuckled. Was that a compliment? For a doofus like you. Ah, there it is. Once they climbed up to the roof, there was a slight problem. Sunny failed to consider that the hole in the tiles that he used to enter the cathedral, while wide enough for his small frame, would be too tight for the tall and robust huntress to crawl through. Looking at the narrow gap between the massive plates of dark marble, Effie gave him a gloomy look. However, before Sunny could come up with an alternative plan, she simply bent down, grabbed one of the incredibly heavy plates, and moved it aside. The words died on his lips. Strong. So strong. I wonder who is stronger, she or the stone saint. Honestly, he wasn't sure. Before proceeding further, Sunny instructed Effie on how they were going to get her inside the hidden chamber, and watched as the huntress reluctantly dismissed her bronze armor, with only a short white tunic covering her lovely olive skin and abundant figure. She looked very, comely. For a moment, his displeasure of having someone intrude upon his secluded peacefulness of his lair evaporated. But only for a moment. Don't you get any strange ideas? Your armor is just too much of a risk. We can't allow ourselves to make any noise, that's all. Effie grinned. Strange ideas? Why are you talking about having strange ideas all of a sudden, huh, Sonny? He gritted his teeth, turned away to hide his blushing face, and crawled into the hole between tiles. Damn woman. Once they landed on the support beam of the cathedral, Sunny guided Effie's hands to rest on his shoulders. Although the sun was still high in the sky, there wasn't any sunlight around them. Only the floor of the ancient temple beneath them was bathed in it. But even then, large areas of the grand hall were drowned in deep shadow. Only it wasn't really shadow. It was darkness. Not one born from the absence of light, but true darkness, one which even his sight could not pierce. Sunny didn't know if it was summoned here by the Black Knight or simply obeyed him, but this was how the bastard had managed to sneak up on him unnoticed back when they first met. In any case, he had to guide Effie across the beams of the cathedral. One wrong step and they would plunge to their deaths. What a bother. Feeling rather awkward because how close their bodies were to each other, Sunny quietly sighed and took a step forward. It was hard to concentrate. Strange ideas. Who was having strange ideas? Not me. A few minutes later, they reached the hidden balcony behind the statue of the unknown goddess. Despite the fact that nothing out of the ordinary had happened, Sunny was rather on edge. Something told him that this was going to be a really long week. Once they entered his hidden chamber, Sunny informed Effie that she was free to create light and speak. Not wasting any time, the unruly huntress summoned a radiant memory and looked around with curiosity. The beautiful and spacious room that had once belonged to the priestess of this ancient temple was suddenly flooded with soft light. The intricate engravings on the wall created an atmosphere of sanctity and elegance. Here and there stood various pieces of furniture, most made out of opulent pale wood, with a few mismatched pieces that Sunny had scavenged from the ruins. Effie whistled. Have to give it to you, Sunny. You sure know how to live in style. Who would have thought? He smiled. Jealous? She sighed. The important thing is that even if Gunloud tracks us here, none of his people would be able to enter, so we're indeed safe. Slightly disappointed, Sunny shrugged. Well, make yourself at home. I'll show you the back exit and other stuff later. With that, he furtively glanced around and tried to quickly hide a few things from sight to make his home more presentable. If he had known that there was going to be a guest here, he would have cleaned up the mess a little in advance. Not that Effie paid it much attention. She walked around with curiosity, studying the engravings on the wall and ancient furniture. But then, suddenly, Sunny heard a loud giggle coming from behind. Turning around, he saw Effie standing in front of the wardrobe hidden behind a stone panel. The wardrobe was currently open, showcasing the garments left behind by the priestess. The huntress looked at him with a strange smile. Why is she staring at me? What? Effie shook her head. No, nothing. It's just... Sonny, when I first saw you, I thought, look at this tiny boy. He's just like a toy. You just want to dress him up like a doll and play with him. Sonny blinked a couple of times, then scowled angrily. Who are you calling tiny? I'm not tiny in any way, you beanpole. Not paying him any attention, the huntress glanced at the wardrobe and giggled again. Then, suppressing laughter, she said, Who knew that you were into playing another kind of dress-up, huh? It took Sonny a couple of seconds to realize what she was implying. When he did, he turned bright red from outrage. The nerve! The gall! How dare she! What are you talking about? Those aren't mine! The priestess who lived here before left them behind. Effie nodded a couple of times. Sure. You just happen to have a wardrobe full of pretty dresses. By accident. That's the truth. I never lie. She looked at him with a wide smile. Oh, but of course. It must be the truth. I totally believe you. Definitely. Sonny stared at her with his mouth wide open, not knowing what to say. Effie, meanwhile, looked around and innocently fluttered her eyelashes. But, Sonny, we have another problem. Gritting his teeth in irritation, he snapped, What is it? She lingered for a few moments, then said teasingly, There's only one bed. What a predicament. Whatever should we do? Sonny glared at her for a long time, then spat. You take the damn bed. I'll sleep on the floor. With that, he turned away and tried to take a deep breath. Why did I ever agree to this? Women, damn women. They're the true terror. Indeed, this was going to be a very long week. Chapter 182. Dinner Time. After Sonny calmed down a little and had time to think about it, he realized that things weren't as bad as he had thought. Yes, living this close to the rambunctious huntress was a very special kind of trial, especially due to how much joy she seemed to derive from tormenting him. But there was one redeeming aspect to all of this, aside from the fact that he would constantly get to feast his eyes on... Wait, back to the topic. It was that Sonny was a nocturnal creature. He didn't have to sleep on the cold floor or interact with the vigorous huntress that much, because he would be asleep during the day and out hunting during the night. The window of time when they would both be awake and stuck in the hidden chamber together was not that large. More than that, Effie had brought enough food to satiate her an unnatural hunger in that bottomless bag of hers, so he didn't even have to feed her. So hosting her was not going to be as bothersome as he had initially assumed. After showing the huntress around and enduring several more good-natured jabs, he finally had some time to himself. Finally. Sitting down in a remote corner of the chamber, he closed his eyes and dove into the soul sea. As always, the tranquil sea met him with calming darkness and peaceful silence. Not paying any attention to motionless shadows that stood at the edge of the visible part, not even to gaunt and pitiful Harper, he walked over and stood beneath the black sun of his shadow core. Then Sonny summoned the stone saint. Hey there, darling. Guess what? I brought dinner. Before commanding the memories he had purchased with the help of Kai Down, he quickly glanced at the runes surrounding the taciturn monster. Shadow. Stone Saint. Shadow rank. Awakened. Shadow class. Monster. Shadow attributes. Battle Master. Stalwart. Spark of Divinity. Shadow fragments. 6 of 200. Only 6 fragments and she was already so strong. He couldn't wait to see his monster grow even more ferocious. Not wasting any more time, Sunny summoned the first memory, a strange sword with a stupid amount of useless gems embedded into its blade for some idiotic reason, and handed it to the shadow. She took the sword without showing any emotion and ruthlessly shattered it with her gauntlets. "Your memory has been destroyed." Sunny made a face. "Why, thank you, spell. I wouldn't have guessed it if it weren't for you. So helpful." The 2 torrents of ethereal sparks entered Stone Saint's body and were absorbed by the dark embers burning in the depths of the shadows that hid in her body. Stone Saint has grown stronger. Was it him, or did the spell sound a bit hurt? Well, tough. I didn't hear you complaining when Neff was promising to rip you to shreds. He grinned and glanced at the runes again. Shadow fragments, 7 of 200. Satisfied, Sunny summoned the next memory. The process repeated itself. Stone Saint has grown stronger. Stone Saint has grown stronger. Stone Saint has grown stronger. As the number of shadow fragments saturating the core remnants inside his pet monster grew, his mood continued improving. This was the best feeling ever. Shadow fragments, 8 of 200. Shadow fragments, 10 of 200. Shadow fragments, 11 of 200. Finally, after the 9th memory was consumed, the runes describing the number changed to 20 out of 200. The Stone Saint looked considerably stronger already. Remembering the changes that happened to his own body after his first few kills, Sunny could more or less gauge how much her condition has improved. The increment wasn't really that substantial, but in battle, the tiniest advantage could often decide everything, especially considering that it was going to be doubled by the augmenting effect of his indispensable but impudent shadow. All of this was just a prelude anyway. The main event was yet to come. Full of anticipation, Sunny called the onyx armor down. If his calculations were correct, this relic alone should give Stone Saint 12 shadow fragments, almost as much as the 9 lesser memories combined. The jet black suit of ancient plate armor appeared in the air in front of him. Surrounded by the lightless vastness of the silent sea, the feeling of dark grace it emanated was even more pronounced. Sunny clicked his tongue. Ah, what a beauty. It was almost a shame to destroy it. Almost. Slightly reluctant to part with the ancient armor yet, Sunny read the runes describing it. Stev was right. Even the spell could make sense of the damaged memory. Memory. Old. Memory rank. Memory tier. Memory type. Unknown. Memory descriptions. First army. Shed. Own. Memory enchantments. Many of the runes were missing, and those that did appear refused to coalesce into any sort of comprehensible words. However, Sunny did notice a few of the strange runes that made his head hurt, the same ones present whenever the spell mentioned the mysterious unknown. Just as I thought. The armor was clearly connected to the same tribe of nightmare creatures that the Stone Saint had belonged to before becoming a shadow. The origin of the strange living statues was tied to the unknown, so it was logical to assume that the onyx armor had something to do with them too. Well, no matter. He knew that this memory was severely damaged when he bought it. Sunny was never planning on using it anyway, only feeding it to the saint. Time for dessert! With a wide smile, he pushed the beautiful black armor to the stone monster. However, the smile soon froze on his face, because the Stone Saint did not move to take and shatter the armor like she did with all the other memories. Instead, she simply turned her head and looked at it. The hue of the crimson flames burning in her ruby eyes ever so slightly changed. It was almost as though they were filled with the tiniest shadow of sorrow. Come on, eat it! But no matter how much he tried to get the Stone Saint to destroy the armor, she refused. The living statue just stood there and did nothing. After a while, disappointed, Sunny stared at the onyx armor and sighed. Well, serves him right. To be honest, he had a slight inkling that this would happen. Nevertheless, Sonny had decided to buy the armor anyway. It's not every day that you stumble upon a Tier 6 fallen memory, even if it's damaged beyond your ability to repair. Perhaps he would don it one day, if Nephis would actually manage to open up the path to the gateway, and he would somehow find himself among those lucky few to reach it alive and become awakened. Until then, the awesome black armor was pretty much useless. With a deep frown, he left the Soul Sea and summoned it into existence. Soon the armor appeared on the floor of the hidden chamber. Effie looked at it with interest. "Wow, what is this?" Sonny lingered for a long time, and then finally answered, "A decoration, I guess." The huntress raised her eyebrows. "Really? Well, what are you staring at me for?" He gritted his teeth. A few awkward moments later, Sonny said, Can you help me move it? It's too heavy for me to lift." Chapter 183. Learning New Tricks. Your shadow grows stronger. With a rather unpleasant noise, the monster's head fell down. Sonny indifferently bent his arm and wiped the midnight shard on the sleeve of his armor, watching as the massive body slowly toppled over. Standing on the other side of it, the stone saint simply flourished her sword in and stomped it abruptly mid-swing, sending every drop of blood flying to the ground. Then she just stood there, absolutely still, pretending to be a statue. Sonny sighed. "That's a cool trick. I should learn it." Honestly, cleaning his blade on the puppeteer's shroud was not very fair to the Tier 5 armor. He felt guilty. "Watch my back." With the taciturn shadow observing the surroundings, he summoned the prowling thorn and used it to recover the soul shards in the carcass. This was the fourth nightmare creature Sonny had killed this night. With the help of the stone saint, his hunts became much easier than before, not even mentioning the fact that the shadow was as powerful as most of his marks. The mere fact that he had a partner to draw the enemy's attention away changed a lot of things. Sonny was somewhat capable of, but preferred to avoid engaging in direct battle with these abominations. His way of doing things was to strike from the shadows and, ideally, kill the enemy with a single strike. If everything went smoothly, the prey would never even see its killer. Of course, such a hunting method required a lot of cunning, patience, and preparation. He had to observe the enemy for a long time to learn its behavior and weaknesses. The confrontation itself took just a few seconds, but only because days had been spent in advance to make that immediate resolution possible. After hunting in that meticulous way for 3 months, Sonny felt strange simply overpowering the monsters with brute force. The combination of Stone Saint's indomitable defense and his swift blade was nothing short of miraculous. It was almost like fighting side by side with Neff. Almost. With a sigh, Sonny threw the soul shards into his rucksack and stood up. He was facing a problem that he had never expected to face. It was honestly rather bizarre. He was running out of monsters to kill. Awakened nightmare creatures weren't that abundant in the Dark City to begin with, let alone those whom he had already tracked, studied, and felt confident attacking. After tonight's massacre, pretty much every one of them was dead. Sonny had cleaned the house. But he was so much stronger now, so much more dangerous. With the help of Stone Saint, maybe there was no need to be so cautious. No, this is how you get yourself killed. This was a dangerous mindset. Despite his recent growth, Sonny was still in no way the apex predator in the ruins. In fact, he was the opposite of that. Of all the creatures stalking these streets, he was the weakest. Pride is the gravest of all sins. Next thing you know, you'll be trying to hunt the fallen ones. Sonny would perhaps survive a confrontation with a fallen beast. Maybe. But actually defeating one was a whole other conversation. And if he had the misfortune to stumble on something of a higher class, his chances of making it out alive would not be very high. He could start investigating one of the awakened creatures that he knew of, or simply go home. However, something was bothering Sonny. There was this feeling in his head that he had a seed of an idea, but then got distracted and failed to fully form it. What was I thinking about just now? Whether or not to hunt again tonight, how powerful he had become with the help of the shadow, how it was not very practical to wipe the blood with the sleeve of the puppeteer's shroud. Oh, right. Back when he saw the Stone Saint shake off the blood of her sword, he had thought that this would be a cool trick to learn, and at that moment he got a feeling that he was on to something. I should learn it. I should learn it. Suddenly, Sunny's eyes became bright. If he could learn this trick from the Stone Saint, what else would he be able to learn from her? This shadow of his had an attribute called Battle Master, which apparently meant that she was proficient in all forms of combat. Was there a better teacher for someone like him? The answer was no. With his technique stagnating because of the lack of guidance, there was no one better than the masterful Stone Saint to learn from. Suddenly excited, Sunny summoned the taciturn monster back into his shadow and headed home. By the time he returned to his hidden lair, Effie was already awake. Sitting on the bed, she was lazily staring at the ceiling and whistling a cheerful tune. Her long legs were somewhat covered by the blanket, but still, that white chitin of hers was way too revealing. Sunny had to be very careful to look the other way. It was very... "Oh, you're back, good hon?" Instead of answering, Sunny walked over to his chest, glanced at the huntress with suspicion, and opened it. Then he poured the contents of his rucksack inside. 7 soul shards fell on the pile, which was sadly visibly diminished because of his recent expenses. It was still nothing to scoff at, though. Effie whistled. 7? How many heads is that? Sunny closed the chest and sat on it. 4. 3 monsters and 1 beast. Effie blinked, a bit stunned. 3 monsters? How did you manage to kill 3 monsters in one night? He hesitated, then sighed. Trying to hide the existence of the Stone Saint would be very bothersome, especially if he was going to venture on an expedition with Neff's cohort. Out there in the labyrinth, chances were that none of them would be able to hold back to hide their races. That was, if he was even going to agree to it, of course. Anyway, there would not be much harm in revealing her now, or rather, the benefits outweighed it. "I'll show you, just don't freak out." Effie giggled. "I'm pretty sure that nothing you're capable of showing can freak me out." Ignoring her teasing tone, Sunny glared at the huntress and summoned the saint out of his soul sea. Immediately, 2 crimson flames ignited in the depths of his shadow. A moment later, the menacing stone knight stepped from it on the floor of the hidden chamber and turned her head to Effie. Effie recoiled. What? What the hell is that?" Chapter 184. Value of Humility. The mighty huntress stared at the stone saint, her hand hovering in the air, ready to grasp the shaft of the spear. Her beautiful hazel eyes were full of tension and dark anticipation. The contrast between that fierce pose and the fact that she was still comfortably wrapped in a blanket was so funny that Sunny couldn't help but snicker. "Gee, relax. Haven't you seen an echo before?" Effie blinked. "That thing is yours? Wait, you got an echo?" He gave her a nod and gestured at the stone saint. "Yes, I did. Meet Saint. Ain't she a beauty?" The huntress stared at the taciturn creature, then scowled with outrage. "You lucky bastard! You do know that I haven't even caught a sniff of an echo after 3 years in this pit? How dare you get one before me, huh?" Sunny laughed. "Actually, this was my 2nd echo. The first one got killed in the labyrinth." Effie glared at him for a long time, then shook her head with an expression of utter dejection. Finally, she turned to the shadow and studied her. "Wait, is she what I think it is?" Sunny nodded. "Yeah." The huntress stood up from the bed and, leaving the blanket behind, walked barefoot around the stone saint. She studied her from all angles and then said, "How the hell did you manage to kill one of these things and survive?" Sunny, who had found himself involuntarily studying Effie from all angles as well, blinked a couple of times and shrugged. "Actually, they got wiped out by a group of fallen. It was an epic clash, to say the least. I just happened to be there in time to finish one off, and here we are." Effie stared at the shadow with admiration. "What class is she?" Sunny smiled. "Awakened monster. But I watched her kill 2 fallen beasts, so I'd say she's an elite among her peers. Anyway, you can see how it's not possible to hunt 3 monsters in one night with her by my side. I'd studied them in advance, of course. That's why we were so fast in dealing with them." The huntress crossed her arms, thought for a bit, then gave Sunny a strange look. "Why are you showing her to me? With how paranoid you are, I'd expect you to keep such a treasure hidden." He stood up, lingered for a moment, then said, "With what I have planned, showing her to you is sort of a requirement." Effie grew silent, then gave him a mischievous smile. Sorry to disappoint. Don't get me wrong. I'm up for all kinds of fun, but, Sonny, nightmare creatures is where I draw the line. He frowned, not quite getting where she was talking about. Then his eyes widened. What kind of degenerate are you? Training! I wanted to use it for training! The unruly huntress blinked innocently. Training? Sonny, there's nothing wrong with being a bit inexperienced at your age. In fact, it's quite charming. You don't need to resort to this kind of thing, you know? Inexperienced? Who are you calling inexperienced? I'm plenty experienced. Wait, crap, what are we even talking about? Dying from laughter, Effie left Sonny to fume with outrage and walked over to the makeshift kitchen while shaking her head. Soon the tantalizing smell of roasting meat filled the air. I'm going to kill her. Should I kill her? It's going to be pure self-defense anyway. A week of this will be the death of me. With a sigh, he tried very hard to calm down. When his thoughts returned to their usual cadence, Sonny stood in front of the stone saint and slowly exhaled. It was time to learn. On his way back to the cathedral, Sonny had made a hard decision. He decided not to augment his body with the power of the shadow during his practice with the stone saint. Even though he knew that this was going to bring him a lot of pain in the future, he was adamant about his choice. There were several reasons why he wanted to face his pet monster with his own physical ability and nothing else. The first and most simple reason was that Sonny knew that the shadow would not always be there when he needed it, just like during the battle against the Spire Messenger when it had been away scouting. Circumstances in which he was going to have to rely on nothing but his own prowess were bound to happen. Not to mention that it had been his own reflexes, and not the shadow, that saved him from being cut in halves by the Black Knight. The second reason was less evident. It had to do with the existing hierarchy of power in the Dark City. At the very top, there were the Fallen. Beneath them, those creatures were merely awakened, and at the very bottom, sleepers. Any fight that a human could face in that cursed place was going to be against an overwhelming force. With time, Sonny had adjusted to this reality and was able, these days, to face the lower classes of the awakened abominations on almost equal terms, with the help of the shadow. He was still weaker, but not by that much. However, deep down he knew that, sooner or later, he would be forced to fight against fallen enemies, and he was also almost sure that he would have to cross swords with humans that had saturated their cores to the brim with soul essence, and were thus much stronger than him. For that reason, his experience hunting monsters, who were not much stronger than his augmented self, was actually an impediment. It dulled his edge and made him forget what it actually meant to struggle against an enemy who was leagues above him. The knowledge and mindset that he desperately needed to retain to have a chance of surviving the future. He had to keep himself humble. And lastly, there was one more truth that he had learned during these 6 months on the Forgotten Shore, and it was that nothing was more beneficial to one's growth than fighting against a superior opponent, especially if that fight ended in your loss. One defeat taught a person more than a dozen victories against weaker enemies would. The problem was, in this cursed place, any defeat meant death. So Sonny actually had little experience losing to someone. From start to finish, he tasted loss only 3 times. Once in a battle against the Carapace Centurion, once when he had faced Nephis under the branches of the Soul Tree, and once in this very cathedral, when the Black Knight's sword had sliced his stomach open. Each of those defeats taught him more than anything else did. So, having the opportunity to fight with a monster who was much more powerful than him, and had yet no desire to kill him, was an extremely rare and precious opportunity. That's why Sonny steeled himself and let the shadow rest on the floor while he faced the Stone Saint. Taking a deep breath, he summoned the Midnight Shard, assumed a defensive stance, and looked the menacing Stone Knight right in the eyes. "Attack me!" Not wasting even a second, she did just as she was told. Oh, crap. Chapter 185 Battle Master. The shadow attacked with the vicious strength of a true monster. Knowing perfectly well that his strength was not enough to block her sword, Sonny desperately moved the Midnight Shard to deflect the strike to the side. The countless hours of practice and hundreds of thousands of times he had repeated his katas had not been in vain. His body moved with lightning speed, placing the blade in the path of the Stone Saint's weapon at just the right angle. Feeling the impact reverberate in his bones, Sonny gasped from the pain and stood his ground. Guided by the Midnight Shard, his shadow's sword glided to the side and missed his body by a wide margin. However, before Sonny had time to congratulate himself, the saint simply continued moving forward and slammed into him. Being hit by her shield felt like crashing into a stone wall at high speed. Flying back, Sonny impacted against an actual wall and rolled to the floor. A small yelp escaped from his lips. Getting distracted from her food for a moment, Effie glanced at him and called, "Sonny, you alive?" He weakly raised a hand and brought his thumb and index finger together in the shape of a circle. "Yeah." The huntress smiled. "Good. Don't die yet, all right? It's going to be really inconvenient for me to get out of here without your help." Sonny gritted his teeth. "Is that all you care about?" "I'll try." Slowly rising to his feet, he staggered and had to lean on the wall to balance. The Stone Saint returned to her spot and stood there indifferently, not paying any attention to his furious glare. With a heavy sigh, Sonny walked back to stand in front of her, raised the Midnight Shard, and spat. Again. Over the course of the next few days, Sonny often wondered if he had really gone mad. Otherwise, why would he willingly subject himself to this torture? His life now consisted of only 3 things: spending time with Effie, practicing with the Stone Saint, and exploring the cursed ruins. Out of the 3, the time he was spending in the deadly maze at the Dark City was by far the least dreadful. He even found himself enjoying it a great deal. Once he began thinking about a cursed ancient ruin teeming with abominable creatures as a comforting place, you should really start thinking about your life choices. And yet, Sonny knew that he was on the right track. Painful as they were, his training sessions with the menacing shadow had turned out to be even more advantageous than he imagined. Every bruise, every cut, every drop of blood that he spilled was making him stronger. After a long period of stagnation, his technique was finally improving again, and it was doing so with noticeable speed. The best thing about it was that he had not even scratched the surface of the immense didactic potential of the Battle Master attribute. For someone like him, who had never received a formal education in combat, it was simply a boon. It was a hidden treasure. Back when he had observed the shadow in a fight against the Carapace Centurion, he had noted her distinct battle style. The taciturn creature fought with the firmness of stone, combining flawless defense with devastating offense. Each action was efficient and perfectly calculated, with blocks, dodges, and deflections, leading into deadly riposts. It was solid, indomitable, and inevitable. However, this was not the only battle style that the Stone Saint was perfectly proficient in. Rather, it was something that she had used based on her current weapons and opponents. Back when her original fought against 2 harrowing fallen beasts, her style was reckless and brutal, disregarding any form of defense in favor of an endless onslaught of vicious attacks. Although there were some foundational similarities between them, these 2 techniques were vastly different. It seemed as though she was able to switch between countless styles to suit the situation. Sonny couldn't wish for a better sparring partner. His own style, or rather, the kernel of one that had been given to him by Nevis, was flowing and unpredictable. It focused on adaptability and making it impossible for the enemy to anticipate your next move. The more Sonny fought against the Stone Saint, the more he realized how extraordinary it actually was. However, it didn't mean that this style couldn't be improved. In fact, Sonny suspected that it was actually designed with the intention of being able to incorporate various elements from other sources. If so, it was a perfect foundational style to learn. All of this made him wonder, where had this strange style come from, and if Changing Star had taught him its basics for a reason. In any case, he was determined to make sense of it, improve his mastery of the things he had already learned, and begin to incorporate elements of Stone Saint's dark technique into his own. However, this was easier said than done. At first, Fighting against the menacing shadow appeared to be almost impossible. Every time he gave her the command to attack, he would inevitably end up on the floor in mere moments, groaning and consumed with pain. His whole body was bruised black and hurting terribly. If not for the tenacious enhancement of the blood weave, Sonny did not know if he would have been able to continue. Or at least continue at an acceptable rate. With its help, however, the speed of his recovery was considerably faster. It was almost inhuman. Because of that, he was able to train more intensely and for longer periods of time. Just as he had expected, every defeat taught him something new. Losing to a superior opponent was the best way to improve indeed. Back in the real world, many people were foolishly obsessed with their pride and lived for nothing but to achieve victories against others. Not Sonny, though. He was perfectly content with losing time after time, as long as he continued to become stronger with each loss. The only person he wanted to defeat was the version of himself from the last fight, over and over again. Just like that, he had slowly begun to put up at least some resistance to the Stone Saint. At first, he was happy with being able to deflect one attack, then two, then several. Before long, he stopped counting the number of attacks and started counting the number of seconds he remained on his feet. It was just a couple at first, then 4 or 5, then a dozen. Finally, he was able to fight with the menacing Stone Knight for vast amounts of time, sometimes even up to a minute. Even Effie seemed to be impressed. She usually paid little attention to his training, but after some time, Sonny noticed her glancing in his direction more and more. At first, he thought that the unruly huntress simply enjoyed watching him suffer in his suffering, but then he realized that she was actually trying to learn from his mistakes too. Sonny didn't mind. His movements slowly became more confident, purposeful, and precise. His body, while damaged and bruised, was brimming with strength and agility. He was maturing. It was then, when his spars with the shadow turned less one-sided, that Sonny noticed something strange. And when he did, everything changed. Chapter 186 Eureka. It took Sonny a long time to perceive the anomaly for several reasons. To begin with, it was so subtle that it was almost impossible to notice. His whole mind was concentrated on the thoughts of battle technique and styles, and still, he only saw it by accident. The second reason had to do with his decision to face the Stone Saint without the augmentation of his aspect ability. Because of it, the shadow had nothing to do. It returned to acting as a proper shadow and obediently repeated his every move while he fought. The last reason was Effie, or more specifically, the fact that she had brought a source of light into the hidden layer, making the shadow actually visible. Because of this unlikely combination of events, Sonny was able to see it. He was in the middle of a fierce battle against the Stone Saint, sweat and blood trickling down his battered body. The clamor of swords clashing against each other permeated the chamber, drowning the raspy sound of his laborious breathing. Deflecting another blow, Sonny swiftly crouched and let the edge of the creature's shield whistle through the air above his head. His rather clumsy attempt to imitate one of the Stone Saint's explosive riposts was easily blocked, and the two of them continued the duel. This time, it lasted for an especially long time. Sonny was pretty sure that he had already withstood the oppressive assault of the monster for 1.5 minutes. If true, this was his personal best. After countless spars like this, he would sometimes enter a special state of flow. In it, his mind was calm and clear, operating at a tremendous speed. When Sonny entered this state, his attention became simultaneously sharp like a blade and strangely unfocused. Normally, he would have to concentrate on specific details, like watching the enemy's footwork to predict where the next blow would come from. Sonny was even able to split his mind in two, with one part of it absorbing the information that came through his eyes, while the other was preoccupied with what his shadow saw. In this way, he could either concentrate on two enemies at the same time, or have a full view of his surroundings, so that no one could sneak up on him from behind. However, with his attention not focused on anything, he was somehow capable of perceiving everything. Every detail, be it the enemy's footwork, the direction of their gaze, or the slight change in the environment, simply became a part of the all-encompassing tapestry that he perceived as a whole. Needless to say, this ability to see everything simultaneously and think with sufficient speed to act on it dramatically boosted his combat performance. It was consonant with and felt like a natural continuation of the strange sense of clarity that he had achieved after almost dying in the battle against the first Carapace Centurion. Right then, Sunny entered this state of flow once again. After a few more exchanges, he suddenly noticed that there was something strange about his shadow. Instinctively, he paid it more attention while continuing to fight. It was then that he realized that his shadow's movements, while almost exactly like his, were actually not the same. There was a very slight, almost imperceptible difference, but he could feel something vast and profound hiding in this tiny divergence. Stunned, he slowed down and stared at the shadow. Wait, what did I just see? Sunny was so stunned, in fact, that for a moment he completely forgot where he was. In the next second, the rim of the stone saint's shield hit him in the chest, sending him flying at the wall once again. Sunny crashed into the cold stones, fell to the floor, and weakly groaned. Ouch, that one hurt. However, he immediately forgot about the pain. Sitting up, Sunny stared at his shadow with wide eyes. This is... What did he see? The shadow's movements, while exactly like his own, were also different. It was as though a light ignited in his head, or rather, became drowned in shadows. Sunny suddenly had an epiphany. This revelation was so astonishing that he almost cried out loud. The divergence between him and his shadow was not random, nor was it chaotic. It was consistent and harmonious, hinting at a deeper meaning. And that meaning was that his shadow had a battle style of its own. Sunny only saw a glimpse of it through the slight discrepancy of their movements. If someone didn't know the shadow as well as he did, they would never notice anything. Even he only saw it by accident. What he saw wasn't enough to discern anything about that battle style except for the fact that it existed. He was able to sense its essence. It was flowing and insidious, shapeless and ever-changing, like the shadow itself. This description was so close to its nature that Sunny felt it was safe to assume that the movements of the battle style were not something the shadow performed on purpose, but rather a manifestation of its innate quality. Did his shadow have a battle art infused into its very being? It is an invaluable helper, he whispered. If this was true, then Sunny had just found the answer to the question that had been tormenting him for the last few days. While the battle style entrusted to him by Nephis was versatile and deadly, and the technique of the Stone Saint was indomitable and oppressive, they were not his own. No matter how much he practiced them, he felt that there was something missing. Individuality. Only by creating a style of his own would Sunny be able to become equal to the best fighters out there. Until then, he would always be an imitator. Of course, creating a true battle style was not something that a novice like him was capable of doing. More than that, there was a difference between knowing what the mysterious shadow style existed and actually understanding what it was. But still, it was a beginning. If he learned the secret hiding inside his shadow and combined it with the flowing adaptability of his current style, what would the result be? Standing up, Sunny spat a mouthful of blood, wiped the sweat off his brow, and walked over to his tormentor, the Stone Saint. Raising the midnight shard, he gritted his teeth and said, "Again!" Soon the clangor of swords resounded in the hidden chamber once more. Only this time, Sunny paid close attention to his shadow. Chapter 187 Trial of Strength. Trying to learn the secrets of the shadow was a very slow process. Sunny could only see glimpses of the mysterious battle style while fighting against the Stone Saint, and doing so usually required his full attention. As long as he wasn't fully concentrated on his opponent, their clashes ended in mere seconds, making so that there was nothing to observe. But when he concentrated on the battle at hand, he couldn't really pay any attention to the shadow, which in turn eliminated the possibility of observing it. Finding the right balance between the two tasks was not easy, not to mention painful. Every time he failed, a new bruise appeared on his body. And yet there was progress. Although Sonny was still unable to peer into the depths of the battle art, he was slowly beginning to get a feel for it. His shadow was more treacherous, fluid, and malleable than he was. There was a hint of graceful cadence to its movements that lacked in his. It was as though it was performing a dance. A shadow dance. Frustrated by the lack of a breakthrough, Sonny wanted to push himself harder, but had to stop himself. Even considering the tenacious effects of the bloodweave, his training regimen had already brought his body to its limits. He needed to preserve its condition if he was going to join Nephis on her long expedition. Not unless he wanted to enter the labyrinth while crippled with exhaustion and injuries, of course. What Sonny failed to realize, due to the lack of experience, and the fact that he had been mostly self-taught, was that this accomplishment had already made him an outlier as far as humans went. Most novices weren't even able to master the superficial aspects of different battle styles, let alone recognize their fundamental traits for what they were. They simply followed the rules without understanding them, regarding styles as something indubitable and rigid. Only the most experienced fighters had enough understanding of the essence of a battle art to attempt to manipulate it. So he was already far ahead of the curve. But since Sonny never had a proper mentor, he had no idea that he was trying to accomplish something that an average human would never be able to do. His only point of reference was Nephis, who was an absolute outlier herself. If renowned masters of combat arts were to learn that a self-taught youth from the outskirts had managed to dismantle two incredibly complex battle styles into basic elements and assemble them together to better suit his tastes, while also trying to learn a third one from his shadow, they would be stunned. However, Sonny just thought that he was unsuccessful and incredibly slow. Maybe I'm just stupid. Picking himself up from the floor, Sonny sighed and wiped the sweat off his forehead. Then he glanced at the stone saint and leaned on the wall. You're done for today? Effie was nearby, dying from boredom. Watching Sonny torture himself was her only way to entertain herself in this dark room. Well, that and torturing him herself, among other things. Whatever. He gave her a tired nod. Yeah, I think so. It's already dusk, so I'll probably rest for a bit and go out. The huntress narrowed her eyes. By the way, I wanted to ask, how do you even know what time of day it is? There's no windows here and we can't hear the sea yet. He glanced at her with a gloomy expression and reluctantly answered, The shadow of the Crimson Spire. I can feel it. Effie blinked a couple of times, then shrugged. Ah, I see. Anyway, since you're done, can I have a turn with your girlfriend? Sonny gritted his teeth and answered without even thinking, She's not my girlfriend. Only then did he realize what Effie was asking. She had never shown interest in sparring with the Stone Saint before. Why now? Not that it mattered. And no, you can't. The huntress tilted her head. What? Why? Sonny scoffed. Do I need to explain it? It's too dangerous. What if something happens to you? Effie giggled. So, let me get this straight. You can train with her all day every day, but you think that, for me, she's too tough? He shook his head. Don't misunderstand. It's just that if something happens to me, the worst outcome is that I die. If something happens to you, however, I'm going to get killed by Nephis. The end result is the same, but one way is vastly better than the other. Get it? She crossed her arms. Oh, come on. I just want to see which one of us is stronger. Sonny scowled. No way. Don't even think about it. Effie silently glared at him. I said no, okay? There's no way I'm letting you fight her. The huntress grinned. All right. That's not going to be a problem. A few minutes later, Sonny was staring at the scene in front of him in disbelief. How did it come to this? Leaning over the opulent wooden table stood Effie and the stone saint. The elbows of their right hands rested over the table, while their palms were pressed against each other. The shadow was taciturn and indifferent, while the huntress was full of enthusiasm. They were preparing to arm wrestle. Effie glanced at him and grinned. Want to bet who's gonna win? If I overpower your girlfriend, you'll owe me a shard. No, 10 shards. Sonny sighed. What if you lose? The unruly huntress winked at him. You know what? I don't even want to know. I don't gamble, so forget about it. Effie sighed. So boring. Anyway, let's do this. She gripped the stone saint's hands and prepared to wrestle. Let's go! Instantly, both the shadow and the huntress tried to bring the opponent's arm down. The table groaned, subjected to a crushing amount of pressure. For a moment, it seemed that the stone saint was on the losing side, but in the end, her hand only moved by a millimeter. The monster stared at the young woman with her ruby eyes, her face hidden behind the visor of the helmet. There was no emotion in her gaze. Effie's hazel eyes, on the contrary, were full of mirth. There was a relaxed smile frozen on her face. However, Sunny could see that she was putting her all into this struggle. The lean muscles tautened under the olive skin of her back. Her whole body was like a loaded spring, brimming with strength and overwhelming power. And yet, the shadow's hand did not move. It seemed as though neither of them could overpower the other. Huh? I wonder who will give up first. A second after second passed in silence, but nothing changed. Both Effie and the stone saint were persisting, not giving up even a tiny bit of ground. The amount of strength they were exerting to keep this volatile balance made Sunny sweat a little. They're both monsters. In the end, the first one to give up was the table. Not able to withstand the pressure anymore, it simply exploded. Covering his face to protect it from the flying splinters, Sunny froze for a second, then stared at the pile of tiny debris. A feeling of deep sorrow and indignation pierced his heart. Oh no! My table! Chapter 188 of Heaven and Hell. Just like that, a week had passed. Miraculously, Sunny had survived. Even more miraculously, he had somehow managed to not kill Effie, which was a big accomplishment in and of itself. In fact, by the end of it, their forced cohabitation had turned rather pleasant. They were both solitary hunters, after all. There was an instinctive understanding between the two of them. His overall combat skill and particularly comprehension of both his own battle style and that of the Stone Saint had improved by leaps and bounds. He felt faster, stronger, and better prepared to face the horrors of the Dream Realm. Although he had yet to reach the same level of physical power that he had possessed before sacrificing 100 shadow fragments to create the Shadow Saint, Sunny felt that the current him was far deadlier of an opponent. Which was good, considering how fast the grim future was approaching. Currently, Sunny and Effie were sitting on the support beam of the main hall of the cathedral, looking down from the head-spinning height. Far below and away from them, the Black Knight walked through the patches of light and darkness, continuing his never-ending patrol. Effie scowled, then whispered, "So, this is the bastard?" Sunny gave her a gloomy nod. "Yeah, in the flesh. Or whatever he has instead of it." The unruly huntress gave him a long look. "How the hell did you manage to live through a fight with that fiend?" He grimaced. "Barely. Also, calling it a fight is giving me way too much credit. I just got myself gutted and crawled outside. He never leaves the cathedral, so I got away." She shivered. "Are you sure that he won't hear us?" Sunny pointed down. "As long as he doesn't walk past that column, and as long as we're not too loud and keep our voice down, we're safe. Trust me, I've been studying that bastard for 2 whole months." Effie suddenly grinned. "So, how loud are we talking about? Because I can promise to—" Sunny rolled his eyes. "Can you stop? We're in a temple, for God's sake." He didn't need to hear the end of that phrase to know that it was going to be highly suggestive and very inappropriate. She quietly giggled. "Fine, fine." After a couple of minutes passed in silence, Sunny looked down and saw that the pale light of dawn was slowly turning brighter. It was almost time for the two of them to leave the cathedral. He had yet to come to the final decision regarding Neff's request. Depending on his choice, he and Effie would, perhaps, never see each other again. Sunny quietly sighed. Then, turning to the huntress, he said. Hey, Effie, can I ask you something? She looked at him with a silent question in her eyes and shrugged. Sure, go ahead, doofus. Sonny hesitated, feeling the somber mood of the situation. Then, looking away, he said, Tell me honestly, were you dropped on your head a lot when you were a kid? Effie blinked a couple of times, then suddenly pressed both hands against her mouth to suppress a laugh. In the process, she almost fell down the support beam. Heavens, Sonny, do you want me to laugh out loud and get us both killed? What's up with that question? No, I was not. He looked at her with a dubious expression. Then, why are you so damn cheerful all the time? It's not normal. You're like a crazy person. And I know a thing or two about that, mind you. The huntress smiled. Ah, that. Then she shrugged. It's simple, really. Sonny waited for the explanation, noticing an unfamiliar air of melancholy around the vigorous young woman. Her usual infectious vitality somehow felt lessened. It's because I don't think that this place is as bad as all of you seem to believe. Everyone in this dark city is convinced that this is hell. She hesitated. But to me, it's a paradise. Sonny glanced at her and frowned. How so? Effie sighed. You wouldn't understand. But for some of us, the real world was more of a hell than the dream realm. Sonny turned away, thinking about his one life in the outskirts. The reason he was able to adapt so well to the ruthless terror of the nightmare spell was because, at its core, it wasn't that different from his own reality. Still, what kind of paradise is this? A sad smile appeared on the young woman's face. The only kind we deserve, I guess. Then she looked at Sonny and asked, Say, Sonny, you're from the outskirts, right? So you didn't receive a lot of education, I bet. He shook his head. She chuckled. Well, not like it would have changed anything. The schools are basically propaganda camps anyway. They teach kids some useful stuff, but also turn them unable to ask questions and blind to the truth. Sonny raised an eyebrow. The truth? Effie gave him a nod. The truth that our world is dying. Well, not the world, really. Just the part of the ecosystem that we need to survive. Something moved in his memory. A year or so before Sonny was born, a whole continent was lost because of a Category 5 gate had opened on its coast. But the huntress quickly overturned his expectations. And I'm not talking about the nightmare spell. I'm talking about what we, humans, have done to our planet without anyone's help. There were more than 10 billion people on Earth a couple of hundred years ago. Did you know that? But now, there's barely 3. And only half of them have food and shelter because of us awakened and the powers we possess, which were given to us by the spell. She wasn't wrong. Sonny remembered the poisonous, acrid air of the outskirts, the inhuman conditions in the underground factory where his mother had worked, the towering barriers protecting the city from the deadly winds of the wasteland outside. He knew, of course, that the planet was not in a good shape compared to the past. But he never really thought about it that much. To him, this was simply how life always worked. Effie shrugged. Who knows how many of us would still be alive without the spell? I honestly don't know. But if you ask me, I think that one day in the future, more people will believe that this realm is a paradise, just like me. On that ominous note, she stood up and stretched her whole body, making Sonny hurriedly look away. Damn, pure thought, Sonny. Anyway, it's already morning. Time to meet up with Princess and the others. Let's go. Soon they were standing in front of the cathedral. The morning sun was slowly crawling through the sky, washing the ancient city in its pale light. Sonny and Effie did not have to wait long before Nephis and her companions appeared from the ruins. Sonny blinked. There was Changing Star herself, Castor, Cassie, And Kai. What the hell was he doing here? Once the floor sleepers approached and greeted them, Sunny immediately stared at the beautiful young man. Knight? Why are you here, buddy? The archer smiled. I'm very happy to see you too, Sunny, my friend. Lady Nephis has asked me to join her on this expedition, and after careful consideration, I have decided to agree. Sunny blinked a couple of times. All right, I know that I'm crazy, but when did you lose your mind too? Kai looked at him with a strange expression. Wait, crazy? What do you mean you're crazy? Sunny sighed. Never mind. Then he turned to Nev. About your request? I'm ready to join the expedition, but on one condition. I will not become a part of your cohort. Rather, you can provide sufficient compensation to acquire my services. Nephis looked at him for a while, with an inexorable expression on her face. Then she said in an even tone, Do you have something in mind? Sunny grinned. As a matter of fact, I do. Behind us, you can see a magnificent ancient cathedral. Inside that cathedral lives a creature which is called the Black Knight. He's a fallen devil. In return for my help during the expedition, I want your help after it is concluded. Once we return... He paused for a moment, and then added, I want you to help me kill it. A dead silence fell on the small square. After a while, Castor finally spoke, an expression of subtle shock on his face. Sonny, did you perhaps misspeak? We are only sleepers, after all. How are we supposed to kill that Black Knight of yours? A nightmare creature of his rank and class. Sonny's grin widened. Then, with an immense feeling of vindication, he looked at Castor and said, It's just a fallen devil. Chapter 189 Sonny's Brilliant Emporium. The expressions on the faces of Castor, Effie, and Kai were simply priceless. Sonny had to stop himself from laughing out loud. His shadow, however, did not. Luckily, it had no vocal cords, so all it could do was hold its stomach and shudder slightly. Hey, you, behave yourself. Meanwhile, Nephis just looked at him. The corner of her mouth slightly curled upward. After a while, Castor was finally able to answer. Just a fallen devil? Did you say However, Changing Star interrupted him. Glancing at the cathedral, she simply shrugged and said, This is acceptable. Everyone became silent. They simply stared at Neff with bewildered expressions. With some satisfaction, Sonny nodded and said, Don't be so quick to judge. We won't be going into that battle unprepared. I spent months studying the bastard. I know his every ability, every trick, and every weakness. More than that, if you can't even handle someone like him, how are you going to challenge Gunlaug? Isn't that what this expedition is all about? Actually, he debated for a long time whether he should demand that they attack the Black Knight now or after the expedition was over. In the end, he decided that they were all too weak to face the devil, for now. But after months spent in the labyrinth, things were bound to change. There were more nightmare creatures out there, and most of them were not impossible to kill. By the end of the expedition, every member of the cohort was going to have much more soul essence in their cores than they had now. They would also have a wider arsenal of memories at their disposal. More importantly, they would have time to hone and perfect their teamwork. If they wanted to have a chance in the fight against the Black Knight, this was the most important part. Nephis nodded. Sonny is right. It's not like it's impossible to kill a fallen creature. In fact, both Gemma and Tsai had done so in the past, not to mention Gutlaug himself. It just takes a lot of preparation and a little bit of luck. By the end of this, we should be able to take on a single devil and win, provided that we learn its secrets in advance. Sonny smiled. Exactly! Oh, right. Speaking of preparations... While everyone was looking at him with confusion, Well, except Cassie, of course. He took the rucksack off his shoulders and placed it on the ground. Then he opened it up, revealing the soft shine of numerous soul shards. Welcome to Sunny's brilliant emporium. This here is around 50 soul shards, each of them of the awakened rank. Since we will be venturing into the labyrinth, I've decided to give you guys an opportunity to empower yourself a bit before facing the terrible dangers of that ghastly place. Of course, I'll give you a family discount. He had emptied his treasure chest before leaving the hidden chamber. Currently, all of his remaining shards were inside the rucksack. Of course, he hadn't done so out of the kindness of his heart. Sunny never had any money, and so, understandably, didn't know a lot about how to handle it. But one thing he did know was that rich folk never allowed their riches to sit idly. Even money had to work to create more money once it fell into the hands of the wealthy. In the language of rich people, this was called an investment. By investing his shards into the cohort, Sunny was increasing his own chances of making it back alive. No matter how hard he thought, he couldn't imagine a worthier cause. Plus, he wasn't going to just give these shards away for free. The rules of the Emporium are rather simple. You give me memories, I give you shards. I don't care about how powerful or useful the memories are. In fact, the worse the better. Any useless junk you have gathering dust in your soul sea will do. If you don't have any, no problem. You can just promise to give me a memory in the future, once you receive one in the labyrinth. He smiled at the members of Neff's cohort. Not bad, right? No need to thank me, really. Kai stared at the shards, then raised his eyes and looked at Sunny. Sunny, buddy, please forgive my bluntness, but why do you need all these memories? What a good question. Sunny grinned. You see, how should I put this? Let's just say that there's a beauty I know who just can't get enough of them, if you know what I mean. Saying that, he winked at the pretty archer. With a strange expression, Kai turned away and shook his head. However, after this performance, no one else asked any questions. In the end, Sunny was able to exchange his shards for 5 memories. Nephis distributed the shards between the 5 members of the cohort, with each of them getting 10. This was a boon equal to slaying 10 awakened beasts. After absorbing the shards, all 5 of them were going to receive a significant boost to their power. As far as deadly expeditions went, this was the best start possible. Without wasting any time, Neff, Cassie, Effie, Kai, and Castor absorbed the soul essence from the shards. While they were busy doing that, Sunny silently dove into the soul sea and fed the memories he had received to the Stone Saint. Stone Saint has grown stronger. Stone Saint has grown stronger. Stone Saint has grown stronger. Satisfied, he summoned the runes and glanced at them. Shadow. Stone Saint. Shadow fragments. 27 of 200. Then he looked at his own. Name. Sunless. True name. Lost from light. Rank. Dreamer. Shadow core. Dormant. Shadow fragments. 318 of 1,000. Not bad. Looking south, he smiled darkly and wondered. How much would these numbers increase by the time he returned to the Dark City? It had to be by a lot. When everyone was done absorbing their shards and getting accustomed to the changes caused by the sudden influx of soul essence, the cohort was ready to move out. The 6 of them headed south, cautiously traversing the cursed city. Nephis was walking in the front of the party. Her stark black and white plate armor contrasted sharply against the gray stone of the ancient ruins. A step behind her and to the right was Castor, clad in a polished scaled mail that glistened in the morning light like the skin of a silver dragon. To her left was tall and powerful Effie, clad in the archaic bronze armor, with a white chiton beneath. A few steps away, wearing his elegant lamellar armor made out of burnished brown leather, walked Kai. On his back there was a quiver full of heavy arrows. Cassie was walking beside him, her light tunic and bright cloak just the same as before. However, now there was a sheath with a graceful rapier attached to her belt. At the very back, with an unhappy expression on his face, was a pale young man, with messy black hair and a ragged light armor made out of dark gray fabric and black lusterless leather. He was periodically lowering his gaze and grimacing, as though unaccustomed to being in the sun. Of course, it was sunny. Their journey to the edges of the forgotten shore had begun.